We're good to go.
All right. Let's admit all, and then we'll get started. And we're recording, Dr. Rudolph? Okay, thank you. At 6:01 p.m., this meeting of the Mountain View Wisdom School Board will now be called to order. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We will now have our roll call of trustees.
Ellen Wheeler,
Laura Blakely.
Chris Chen.
Laura Berman.
Devin Conley. Let the record reflect that all 5 trustees are present. We will now move on to the approval of the agenda. Are there any trustee questions regarding the agenda? Are there any members of the public who would like to comment on this item? If so, you can raise your hand in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Seeing as there are none, is there a motion from trustees?
so moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 On a motion made by trustee Wheeler and seconded by trustee Blakely, the agenda is approved unanimously. We will now move on to item 2, opportunity for members of the public to address the board concerning items on the closed session agenda. Now is the time for members of the public who would like to address the board regarding closed session agenda items. Tonight's closed session has 1 item on the agenda. To address the board, you can raise your hand in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Seeing as there are none, we will adjourn to closed session. As we do so, I would like to share, if you are a member of the public who is joining us for the first time this evening, the board adjourns to closed session for a while, and then we will be back in public session. So now it's not going to be the most exciting time, but we will see you back in a little bit. At 6:10 p.m., we will reconvene the open session of this board meeting. And I have a closed session report. A settlement agreement for student number 600122245 was approved by a vote of all 5 trustees. It was a unanimous decision. This settlement requires reimbursement funding to the student totaling no more than $45,000 and fully resolves students' claims for the 1920 through 22-23 school years. We will now move on to the consent agenda. Are there any questions or comments from trustees regarding the consent agenda? Seeing as there are none, we will take public comment on this item. If you're a member of the public and you would like to comment on the consent agenda, you can raise your hand in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Seeing as there are none, is there a motion?
I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
On a motion made by Trustee Blakely and seconded by Trustee Wheeler, the consent agenda is approved unanimously. We will now move on to communications. We'll start with employee organizations. Are there any representatives of employee organizations who would like to address the board at this time? Please raise your hand in Zoom. Are there any representatives of district committees who would like to address the board at this time? You can also raise your hand in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Seeing as there are none, we will move on to the superintendent.
All right. So just a quick update. We're glad to have all students back. It's great. Had a great time visiting various classrooms, and just want to let the community know that we have a check-in tomorrow. We'll be talking just about various topics, including the first couple of days, and sort of answering some questions. And it's at the same time that it normally is, around 3:30.
All right, thank you, Dr. Rudolph. Trustee Chang.
Dr. Rudolph, would this be a good time if we just board wanted some updates on the regarding the test positives in the district? I understand that as a Brown Act prohibits the board from commenting on non-agendized items, but this is a time we could get an update as long as we don't give an share our opinion.
What type of update are you looking for? It's
just like was it well, I guess the question would be like, were they was it like voluntary testing on part of the staff that they just, it was like kind of like a coincidence they found, because from my recollection, we're still ways out before formal testing, right?
So staff that are unvaccinated have to get tested. And we stated that we would be bringing back something to the board at the September 2nd meeting about testing for students. And so, you know, if someone is asymptomatic, if somebody is symptomatic, then we ask that they go get tested. And so I don't want to disclose whether these people were vaccinated or not. But as a result of them displaying symptoms, they went and got tested, which is per our policy, and ended up testing positive for COVID.
Are there any sites that are having like on the site kind of like home test kits that can informally be used, or this is kind of voluntary on staff part?
So until because the board asked us to come back with a more, I would just say, aggressive policy in terms of our approach for testing. We don't have sort of a clearly defined approach as to how we're doing it. So and on the September 2nd meeting, we'll bring back what testing looks like. We still have to meet with some focus group individuals, as well as our reopening task force and our union leadership to sort of discuss the particulars, because what the board has requested does require agreement by both of our unions too.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move on to item 7, community comments. This is the time reserved for community members to address the board on items that are not on the agenda. The board and administration welcome this opportunity to listen. However, in compliance with the Brown Act, the board is not permitted to take action on non-agenda items. To address the board, please use the raise hand function in Zoom or press *9 on your phone.
Oh, sorry, just wanted to, and Ms. Victor, you're more than welcome to jump in when I'm asking questions, but she did send me a note just saying that home test kits are actually not approved for public schools. And so we cannot use those.
Okay.
So I'm assuming if you have more specific questions, she may be able to, Ms. Victor, I don't, she may be on her phone or something, but you may want to ask her a little bit more specifically if there's something more technical that you need to answer that I can't answer at this point.
Trustee Chang? No? Okay. All right. Thank you, Ms. Victor. We'll try the community comment piece again. If you are a member of the public and you would like to comment on an item that is not on our agenda tonight, you can raise your hand in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. The board is not permitted to discuss non-agendized items because of the Brown Act, but we do welcome hearing from the public. Seeing as there are no community comments, we will move on to item 8A, revisions to the Local Control Accountability Plan with our Chief Academic Officer, Kathy Bauer.
Good evening. Thank you for having me tonight. I'm going to
I believe Ms. Bauer froze. We'll give her a moment. Hopefully she will come back. There were reports of internet outages throughout the county today. And so she may be having some issues.
I'll try to fill in for her while she goes. So the local accountability plan, as you know, in California, we have what is called the LCAP, as we affectionately call it, is a 3-year plan that outlines the goals and strategies for improving student achievement. And there are 8 state priorities that we must address. There are actually 2 more, but those are referred to are addressed by the county. One of being, for instance, education of incarcerated youth. And so we also develop our budget must match the spending goals that are outlined. And then, of course, our LCAP is aligned with our strategic plan, and our site plans will also be aligned to the LCAP. So this process is done in tandem with the strategic plan, meaning that one of the lessons that we learned from the last strategic plan, 2021, is that we had a 5-year strategic plan, and then we had 2 consecutive 3-year plans. It just so happened that the strategic plan sort of ended and the LCAP was sort of paused for a second. So we were able during COVID to start fresh. And so what we've done is we've aligned Strategic Plan 2027, which is a 6-year plan, and it will now have 2 LCAPs that encompass it. So that way they're always directly related. Now, I do want to point out that we work closely with the Santa Clara County Office of Education to make sure that our district's LCAP meets the criteria for approval, which includes multiple reviews of all sections of the LCAP. And so this is just a quick timeline of the approval process that we have went through. So starting with your approval on June 17th, and as you can see over the month of June and July, there are multiple meetings that take place in order to meet with them. And then there was a letter that was included in the packet that came from the County Office of Education, in which we need to make revisions based off of their review. I also want to point out that our staff, prior to the approval of the LCAP, our staff works closely in tandem with the County Office of Education. So it's always sort of this reiterative process where they're always providing sort of feedback. So there are some areas where we need to make a couple of amendments, and it's really around increase or improve services. So in each of these action items, there were some additional requirements that needed to be met. And part of this is part of some revisions that actually occurred from the California Department of Education. And for these, we need to make sure that we include sufficient detail in order to promote a broader understanding of all stakeholders to help facilitate their ability to provide input. And so there were 6 actions that were contributing to our increase or improve services requirement for unduplicated students that are listed here within our LCAP. Instructional coaches, response to instruction, targeted student support, director of equity, programs to increase opportunities for underrepresented students, and school and community engagement facilitators. And we did revise each one of these to get in compliance with the new guidance and the new ed code, which was just adopted. So what are the revisions that we've had? The request is for us to specify how we are addressing and the effect and the expectation of effectiveness to determine the following actions. There's Ms. Bauer right there. We also needed to make sure that we specify for Goal 1 Action 8. So I'm not going to read each one of these, but what they're asking, what you'll see across all of these different goal areas is really just the expectation as well as how effectiveness is mainly determined. And so here's an example of instructional coaches, Goal 1 Action 1. So the red represents the revision. So for instance, we were asked to provide what is the evidence of effectiveness. And so the coaches are providing training, modeling lessons, and disaggregating data by groups. And coach teachers to practice and ensure teachers are practices responsive to the needs of the students. Additionally, all coaches will provide professional development and differentiation training and shelter instruction observation protocol, both of which are identified in our strategic plan during the 2021-2022 school year. So they can further coach and support classroom teachers to plan for and implement effective instructional strategies to meet the needs of students, specifically socioeconomically disadvantaged, foster youth, as well as English language learners. Right, and so, sorry, and what you can see is that, one of the evidences, it's also the evidence is that we added that this action continues to be prioritized this year as we've determined that it's effective because 78% of teachers agree or strongly agree with our on the district's annual LCAP climate survey that the instructional coaches help me to improve the practice. And so as you can see, I'm not going to read each one of these, but as you can see, we went through each specific item and really started diving in to provide the evidence that these practices are working and how they have been targeted for various subgroups. Ms. Bauer, I don't know if I can't see her, so I don't know if she wants to take over or she's just going to say I'm doing a good enough job for her.
Yes, I'm back. I apologize.
It's all good.
I apologize. Do you want to leave this up for me and just do slides for me?
Yeah, if you just tell me next,
Perfect.
I'll go from there.
All right. So for Director of Equity, you can see, as Dr. Rudolph said, in the red are the pieces that we added. Not too much here. This is essentially a new position. And so just putting in a little more information about why we're having this position. I will say that I did change the action number. I had it originally listed as action 8. It is action 9. I apologize for that. I made the change. So next slide. So programs to increase opportunities for underrepresented students. This is actually an item from our strategic plan that we have put in here. And this item is really going to support our students who are English learners and socially economically disadvantaged. We really want to increase their access to educational opportunities. And we just added some additional wording to make that clear. Next slide. And then the last one was school and community engagement facilitators, which is again a continuing action. And what we did was added some data from our LCAP survey, just showing, which helping to be clear about why we were continuing this action. There were strong responses for continuing to have school and community engagement facilitators, both by our staff and by parents of English learners that did respond to our survey. Next slide. So some things to consider. So we did work with representatives from the county to review all the sections of our LCAP before it was approved on June 17th. We actually met specifically with them to discuss the increased or improved services section. And we made changes based on that meeting. We did receive additional guidance and clarification on June 18th after the approval of our LCAP. And we have been collaborating with the county over the course of the last few weeks to make sure that we added appropriate information and further clarified our actions. And we are not the only district going through this process currently. Next slide. So for next steps, tonight we're asking you to reapprove our LCAP with the updated information. Once that's done and pending your approval, we'll resubmit it. We'll post it on our website. And we'll continue to work to implement and monitor all the actions and services within the cycle. And with that, I'm happy to take questions. And again, I apologize for the internet problem.
It's fine. You don't run the internet, so thank you, Ms. Bauer. Are there questions from trustees? Trustee Berman.
Thank you for the presentation. I noticed in the program for underrepresented students, there wasn't a specific program mentioned or some of the engaging activities that would be introduced to these students. Do you believe that will be okay, that will sort of pass with flying colors without mentioning any of these programs? Is it okay to sort of leave it as, I'm sure this is something that is still in the works. Would they be okay approving something that doesn't kind of dive into something specific?
Yes, and I asked that specific question, and because it's under development this year, it doesn't have the answer. The response I got was yes, it fits the criteria.
Okay, thank you.
If there are no further questions from trustees, we will move to public comment. If you're a member of the public and you would like to comment on this item, you can raise your hand in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Seeing as there are none, are there comments from trustees or a motion? Trustee Chang.
Just a quick comment. I think that kids work best in iterative cycles, and I think it's wonderful for us to model as well that this iterative cycle of feedback and improvements with the county. Thank you.
Is there a motion from trustees? Trustee Blakely.
I move that the board approve the local control accountability plan with the additional descriptions and data to the actions in the increased and improved services section as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? On a motion made by Trustee Blakely and seconded by Trustee Berman, the board votes unanimously to approve the local control accountability plan with the additional descriptions and data to the actions in the increased and improved services section as presented. Thank you, Ms. Bauer. We will now move on to item 8B, the Mountain View Woodsman School District Learning Recovery Plan. and we'll be hearing from our Education Services Program Coordinator, Teresa Lambert, as well as our Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, Swati Dagger. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm happy to be here in my new role and presenting this proposal to you. I'm going to share my screen. And go into present mode. Okay. So this is our learning recovery plan, and of course it aligns to our strategic plan 2027, goal number 1, instructional practices that meet the needs of all students. And just as some background, these next couple of slides talk about the McKinsey report, which highlights the lingering effects of the unfinished learning that has resulted from the distance learning and the pandemic. And there's 4 to 5 month gap nationwide data, and we are seeing similar trends in our district data. And these are a couple of charts that show that 4 to 5 months gap in each of the subject areas. Sorry. So an overview of our plan. Basically, it's important to note that it addresses students at all levels, above grade level, at grade level, and below grade level. And it's important also to note that academic recovery is going to be a multi-year process. It won't be something that can happen in 1 year, but this plan focuses on this school year. And there you do have the link to the Education Trust research that recommends 3 major strategies: expanded learning time, targeted intensive tutoring, and the importance of strong relationships. And this proposal is focusing on the academic components of expanded learning time and the targeted intensive tutoring. And of course, expanded learning time is just adding additional instruction in a variety of ways after school, summer, and in school programming. And I'll talk about that in more detail later on in the strategies. And we have a 2-pronged approach here this year. We have district-wide strategies that will be in place for all school sites, and also site-based strategies that each site will incorporate into their SIPSA, their school plan. So let's go into some data. And this is the iReady data that you were presented in the spring. Just a quick reminder, in reading, we have 70% of our students in the green in Tier 1. And in math, we have 66% of our students in the green in Tier 1. So a data metric that we included in this proposal to demonstrate some of the effects of distance learning. We have attendance data and engagement data. Just quickly, it doesn't include the asynchronous Wednesdays. This is the data for the days where the students had live instruction with the teachers. And when we get to the engagement data, I'll be talking about the DL3 code, which means full participation. This slide shows the 20% absent rate, or chronically absent, and it has all the schools listed. And this slide has the attendance rates for the subgroups, and all the schools are listed. And these are the ethnicity subgroups, the same attendance rates. And this next group set of data is the engagement data. Last year, we also gave the students a code each day. At the end of the day, each teacher gave the students a code of a DL1, a DL2, or a DL3. Minimal participation, partial, or full. So this slide shows for the subgroups, and I'll talk through an example. So let's just take the first one here. EL students at BUB. There's a group of 49 of them. So this slide is read 81% of the days this group of students had an average code of DL3. So this is not 81% of the students, it's 81% of their days at school. This subgroup had an average code of DL3 as compared to the EOs and the RFEPs. I'll give you a few seconds to look at it. I know that you all had this presentation ahead of time and have seen the data. And this is the SED subgroup. And students with disabilities. So to highlight here is the significant subgroups have lower engagement and lower attendance rates across the board at all sites. And at the sites that have higher rates of duplicated students, so students that fall into many subgroups, those sites you will have noticed have lower engagement and lower attendance rates. And we're moving into subgroup data. And these slides highlight the achievement gap. And I'll walk through an example here. So you see in the header, that's the gap in the percent of students that are in tier 1 in the green on the iReady Diagnostic 3. So in this first box, the EL subgroup, compared to all of the students, there's a gap of 15 percentage points at Castro, 22 percentage points at Mistral. That's the gap between the EL students in tier 1 and all the students in tier 1. If we look at socioeconomically disadvantaged, Therakoff, the gap is 16 percentage points. And at Crittenden, it's 27 percentage points between the whole school and this subgroup. So this slide is reading. And this slide is the same for math. Okay, and this slide is for the Hispanic Latino subgroup. On the left is reading and on the right it's math. And so to point out here, at all the school sites, the students in the Hispanic subgroup are achieving at a lower level than the school as a whole. And it's very clear that after more than a year of distance learning, almost a year and a half, all of our significant subgroups, the achievement gap persists. And we don't have Diagnostic 3 to compare from previous years. But we do have the data from this past Diagnostic 3, and we will have data from this year for Diagnostic 3 to hope to see that achievement gap close. And it is also worth noting that the EL students and the students with disabilities have the largest achievement gaps at all sites, closely followed by the socioeconomically disadvantaged subgroup. And the third type of data we have in this proposal is the standards mastery by school and grade. In this, we delved into a standards analysis of the iReady Diagnostic 3 data. The year before last, as a district, we identified the priority standards in reading and math for K-5, and we used these priority standards to look at Diagnostic 3 and see where the gaps are. And I'll just go through this example for BUB. They're always first in order. So on the left are the priority standards for reading. And then this slide focuses on the percent not mastered because this is learning recovery. We need to pay attention to who didn't get the standard. So we can address that this year. And the grades will look at the information from the year before to know what the students are coming in with, what they're coming in strong and what they're coming in weaker, so they can make the changes into their current year instruction. And we'll talk about this more further down in the presentation. And so for each school, there's the reading slide and then 2 slides for math, a K2 slide and a 3-5 slide. And I do need to apologize. I noticed that for the Castro, I duplicated K2 twice. So I do have the 3-5 in the presentation now. But I am going to go through, just go past all of these school slides because you have had a chance to look at them. Oh, sorry, it's going to take a minute. I'm in present mode. And we'll go to the middle school data. Oh, before that, I do want to point out that there's a pattern in the results of every school site. The comprehension standards across all schools showed a need for more support. The vocabulary and the word analysis, definitely some students that need support, but comprehension, all of the comprehension standards showed a greater need, except at Castro, where all of the priority standards need attention. And this is another way of representing the data. The large X shows that every school site showed a need at that grade level, and the small X, that just a few. Sorry. And in math, we did see a pattern also where number sense showed a strong need for support at all grades. And place value in particular at all grades. However, that standard looks at their grade, it needs attention for the next year. And so at middle school, we were able to look at standards level for reading in this gram, and you can see that 6th, 7th, and 8th had very similar needs in which standards need to have attention. And then for the math pathways. For the math pathways, we have the domain level data, and this is the 0.1 data, and I'll pause for a few minutes. A few seconds, actually, sorry. And then here's the domain level data for the 7.0 and 8.0 by the different domains. And as you can see from this data, it is, sorry. It is clear that there are certain standards at every grade that need attention. And we've listed them out here, and I know the schools are doing this sort of analysis as well. This is a jumping off point. All of this data is a jumping off point for the schools to investigate further and deeper about what, for each grade and specific students, what needs to happen. Okay. And with the frequent assessment between the iReady is going to be essential for the sites to be able to be very targeted in meeting the needs of the students. And that is something that we will be working with all the sites with to intensify the formative assessment in between the iReady assessments. And differentiation, that is a district initiative this year. PD already started in August. And we'll be talking more about that in the core instruction changes as well. And that it certainly will be key. Which brings us to Lpac data, and I'll pause for a few seconds. And the reclassification and Newcomer data. So as you saw, the reclassification rate declined significantly in 2021, and there's a couple of considerations for that. The year prior, there were actually 3 rounds of reclassification. So there was a large number of students that reclassified the prior year. And you combine that with COVID hitting and students having less language practice, less opportunity. And some of the students, the difficulty testing, and that affected the reclassification rate as well. So now we come to the meat of it, is what's our thoughts, what's our plan for how do we help these students? There are students in every tier, green, yellow, and red, that didn't meet their growth targets. And so every student, many students were affected by distance learning. And we need to make sure that we are focusing on how to help all students. And so by looking at the tier data, that's how we are finding out what extent of services each child needs. And I'll be working closely with each site to be sure that we are offering the level of service that's indicated by the student need. So all of that data before helped us in helping the sites to understand what each child needs in each subject area. And then the standards mastery analysis gives us the information about the specific standards and skills the child needs. And there in iReady, there's more reports that give even more data about student groupings and the student skills needed. So we have a lot of resources and tools at our disposal to be able to be very targeted. So the first strategy that we are proposing are changes in core instruction. This is an overview of the 3 strategies, sorry. Core instruction, expanded learning time by hiring instructional assistants and RTI teachers if warranted. And strategy 3, the targeted intensive tutoring, also known as high dosage tutoring. So core instruction changes. I spoke briefly to it earlier that reteaching of the priority standards is critical. So this year, it's every grade level needs to focus on the prerequisites coming in, because many students, as you saw from the data, may be lacking the prerequisites needed to access the concepts in the current grade. And so the team planning and the pacing need to take into account how do we incorporate these foundational skills needed for the skill we need to teach this year. And that's why that data was so critical before. Looking in iReady and also doing their own pre-testing, as teachers always do, will give them the information they need. And so that focus is important. The district initiative of professional development and differentiation, as I mentioned, already started in August and will be ongoing throughout the year. It's a priority area for the instructional coaches, as well as SIOP, language development through SIOP. Those are the 2 main areas that coaches will be focusing on this year when they're supporting the teachers. And adjusting RTI is a critical part of this as well. Just similar to core instruction, we can no longer just focus on the reteaching of the skills from that grade in the RTI groups. we need to also incorporate skills from the prior grade in our groupings of students. And language development, helping the students to make up for lost time. Many students last year had less interaction and less opportunity to practice their language skills. And so this year, a very intentional focus on throughout all lessons throughout the day, increasing the opportunities when you're designing your lessons, building in strategies that have a lot of interaction to increase the opportunities for language practice. And strategy 2, expanded learning time. So the big component here is hiring instructional aids for all sites based on their need, a different amount of aids, 5 hours per day, of course, full-time, 5 days a week. And we did not forget about Vargas. I just forgot to type their name on the slide, but they are here in this group with Bub, Imai, and Stevenson. And the intention for the aids is that they will be used to lower group size and deliver targeted instruction. And another component of expanded learning, is using our current partners, BTB, the YMCA, and Right at School in their academic time that's already in their program. Students will be getting additional instructional time during that time. And I will be working with the partners and training their staff in the materials. We are still exploring materials with teachers that will meet literacy and math needs. And this will begin in September as well, in late September. We have 870 students typically each year combined in all these programs. So that's a significant chunk, and they will receive the in-person help after school. So here's an example of what expanded learning time could look like at a school site. Landals would have 3 additional instructional aids to support they can use them to support the RTI program to create smaller literacy groups. So for example, in 4th grade, if there's 3 teachers plus 3 additional aids, all those students could be divided into 6 groups rather than 3, being able to target the instruction more. That's one way it could look like. The students in the lower achievement levels should have a smaller group size than the students in the higher achievement levels. The 60 students that are in the after-school programming at Landals typically each year, they will have their structured tutoring during the academic segment each day. And I will work with each site and each program so that they will know the target skills to do for that site. That's an example of what it could look like. And our third major strategy for this year is the targeted intensive tutoring, the high dosage tutoring. And the data above that we showed, the standards mastery analysis, as was very clear. There are skill gaps that need to be addressed. And the targeted tutoring is virtual. It will be done individually or in small groups, depending on the grade level and the skill need. And we'll be using the data from Diagnostic 3 from the year prior, so they know the skills that were missed, in addition to Diagnostic 1, which will show the skills missing from the current grade, in order to plan the program and determine the students with the highest need. So we're proposing to use a level of intensity model for the frequency of the tutoring. So if a student is in tier 3 on iReady, they would have tutoring 3 times weekly, in tier 2 twice a week, and in kindergarten through 2nd grade, it'd be 1 time weekly for the live virtual tutoring, and 3 through 8 would, because they're already on grade level, they will have access to the on-demand tutoring. The homework hotline is another way of describing that. And for targeted intensive tutoring, you have contracts in front of you tonight for approval. And these are some of the agencies and organizations that I researched and met with. And the two agencies or companies that I am recommending, one is Air Tutor for grades K2, and one is FEV Tutor for grades 3-8. And a third program for the on-demand tutoring for grades 3 through 5 is Paper. In the district in the spring, you already approved a contract with YUP for middle school on-demand tutoring. Excuse me. So in addition to these points here, some major advantages of these programs both include progress monitoring and communicating with the sites and with me, the progress of the students. They both have a rigorous parent engagement component, not only for the initial outreach, but ongoing. And the communication protocol with the sites and with me, if there is a family that needs more attention, a student that needs more attention. And they have flexible scheduling. So it's possible that anytime in the evening, a parent that is convenient for the parent to have the tutoring happen. They can do that anytime in the evening. And both of these companies are directly connected with iReady, and they use the iReady diagnostic data to develop the individual path for tutoring path for each child. And I think it is worth mentioning here that a strategy that I've discussed with the principals is after school, students could be invited to actually stay at school and do the virtual tutoring at school for a target group of students that the principal or the teacher feels would be more beneficial to stay at school to do the virtual tutoring. So an example of the tutoring, at Mistral. They have students in tier 3, 28 students would 3 times weekly, 98 students would receive tutoring 2 times a week. And their students in tier 1 that are in grades 3 through 5, they would have access to the on-demand homework help. And the K2 students, they have 104 of them that were in tier 1. They would be invited to participate in the online tutoring once a week. And their students that are all 3 after-school programs operate at Mistral, and those students would receive their tutoring in person while in that program, their additional instruction. And this is an overview of the budget. The Extended Learning Opportunities Grant, the total allocation is $3 million and change, and this is the breakdown. So to summarize, our 3 major strategies are core instruction changes, the expanded learning time, and by hiring additional instructional aids and working with our current partners. And of course, the targeted intensive tutoring, the high dosage tutoring, contracting with outside agencies because of the sheer numbers of students that will be receiving tutoring. It's very exciting that we're able to provide it for so many students. So our next steps, of course, with the board's direction, implement the learning recovery plan. We also want to explore additional ways to expand the learning time further through intersession, Saturday school, summer school, etc. We need further discussion on that. Also, calendaring state testing later in the year. This needs discussion as well to allow as much time as possible for review and reteaching of the skills that were missed. And after the Diagnostic 1 data analysis, we want to determine if further support is needed by hiring 3 additional RTI teachers at the highest needs schools. So that's still to be determined. Right, I do want to say that Ed Services with Superintendent Rudolph, it's a terrific team. This was a team effort, and I want to thank them so much for their help with this. And with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lambert. Trustees, questions? And you can stop sharing your screen.
I am trying, I'm sorry.
That's fine. Trustee Berman.
Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for just that deep dive into data and sharing all those results with us. I just appreciate the time that you took to put that all together in the slides. It's something I really enjoy looking through, so I really appreciate having it. One of the questions that came, I have a couple of questions, and I put a ton of my questions in the trustee questions that's already posted on the website. So one of my questions now is, if we were to continue to get funding for the following year and the year after, do you think that we have enough data measures or measures in place to identify what's really worked once we put all these programs into place? So really measuring the effectiveness of coaches and how they've made an impact on our teachers, and therefore how the teachers' practices have benefited the students and their skills, or the tutoring or the on-demand tutoring. Do you feel like we have enough measures in place so come the end of the year, when we're talking about which contracts to renew or what to do more of, because that's really where we saw a huge change for us, right? Or a big change in an improvement in student performance and outcomes for students. Do you feel like we have enough measures in place to know which of these things work the best?
That's always the challenge, is isolating which factor made the difference. Because our assessment data will tell us if the students are making progress overall on iReady. However, each of the tutoring agencies, for example, has metrics for attendance as well as exit tickets. So we will have, trust me, I will be working very closely with all of the tutoring to make sure that they are giving us information and data regularly, not waiting till the end of the year.
Thank you. And the other thing that I was thinking about was sort of that, and I alluded to it in my questions. There were just a couple of questions about parent engagement in this process. I know that we're going to have a number of students that aren't where we'd like them to be. So in my mind, I was thinking about, what are these triggers when we think about tiered systems of support and RTI, and we start thinking about SSTs. It made me wonder, how is our district, our teachers, our school sites prepared to engage the parents that we need to engage to make sure that they know what their child needs to come up to grade level, how to help at home, and perhaps isn't finding out that there's trouble when that report card comes, which always feels really late and it's really overwhelming. And so I'm just wondering, do you feel like we need to support our school sites in another way so that we really truly engage our families? Because I think especially for our Latino families, our EL families who want their children to be successful, who want to be there to help, but maybe don't know how to. I know culturally, sometimes we let Latino families will sit and wait by the phone and expect a phone call from our teachers, because they'll wait and say, well, if there's a problem, my teacher will call me. And if I'm not asked to have a meeting, then everything must be fine, right? And I've heard multiple cases where there's sort of a surprise when they find out that their child is behind. So I'm also just wondering, what are those triggers going to be? How can we make sure? And I know every school site sort of does things a little bit differently, but it seems like we want to make sure we have, a net, right? So we have sort of these triggers where we're not letting kids fall further, fall through the cracks, or we're making sure that we're bringing our parents along with us because I think our families have so much potential to really make an impact once we can engage them in the conversation about their child, set some goals, and be really concrete about, we're going to meet in 10 weeks and then we're going to make sure that we've met these things. So I think really outlining for them how to help would really make a difference. So, as a board member, I wonder, do our school sites feel prepared? Do our teachers feel prepared to do something like that, where we're really engaging with our families in a really mindful, meaningful, purposeful way to really make the most impact we can with these programs?
I don't know if anybody's ever going to feel prepared just because of the size of what we're about to undertake. But let's think about from an accountability standpoint how this is going to all work out, right? So obviously this is the first board goal that was introduced or adopted last year, right? And so it's obviously a massive undertaking. And you couple that with the fact that we have additional funds from ESSER that we're going to use in order to make this happen. I think that the key difference here is typically it's more of a reactionary approach. We wait for the data to come in, and then we try to triage as many people as possible as the data is coming, and we're sort of switching groups around. Whereas this time we've already did our initial dive of the data and we've already made a couple determinations, right? One thing that Ms. Lambert didn't sort of went over was we already know the standards by which we need to start focusing on. And so, as she mentioned before, the first priority is to take the actual standards and sort of to readjust those so that we're focusing on the priority standards, but we're also building in time to sort of reteach items that may have been left off that are critical for kids to sort of understand. The second approach of this is that we've already taken sort of the tier triangle. And we've identified all of the students. And if you go back to one of the slides, you'll see she has a specific number of kids at every single site who were either tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. And so let's just change that framework. They're either on grade level, they're almost on grade level, or they're 2 grade levels behind. Right? Because that's really what we mean when we're talking about tier 3. Well, we know what each one of those kids needs in terms of their specific areas that they need to be targeted on. And so part of the targeted tutoring approach that she has is that we're going to target those individuals in conjunction with the work the teachers are actually doing. And so she has that data. We'll reconfirm it one more time because our next diagnostic assessment actually is going to be, I believe it's next week. So we'll be able to confirm one more time. So Terry, as well as is going to start sitting down and sort of double checking to make sure that kids are where they are. Because it's possible a kid can grow some, and it's possible a kid can have a little slippage over the summer, right? Because we did have some kids that were in summer school over the course over this past summer. And so it's possible that they could still be holding ground. And then, if the contract's approved, then it's this real intense focus of getting people in to provide the actual tutoring services to help shore up those deficiencies or those opportunities of growth that sort of exist. And that will occur during the school day. And then we're going to, put it on overload a little bit, or a couple more steroids, where we say, not only do we know that this kid needs X, but we also know that this kid is in after school or is working with Beyond the Bell or is with Right at School or with the YMCA. And so we're going to work and partner with them and communicate, here are the things that we're sort of working on. And that's a different model than what we traditionally do, which is we get the data, we look at everything, we try to shuffle kids around, and then we shuffle them around for RTI, which is, twice a week. And then we turn around and we say, okay, 6-10 weeks later, when we get another assessment, how did we do? And in this instance, as Ms. Lambert was saying, there's more data that's going to be coming that we'll be able to target. But part of her job is actually to come back around and to say, so how are we doing? The piece about the accountability that I was referring to a little bit earlier is that there's also a lever for each one of the principals who are actually on here tonight, right? It is, they have to, just like you're going to hold me accountable for how effective the plan is, I'm going to turn around and hold, Ms. Duggar, Ms. Lambert, Ms. Bauer accountable. But then we're also going to hold the principals accountable for, Ms. Lambert identified 105 kids at your school that needed targeted tutoring. How effective were you getting these students into tutoring? And if not, then what are the factors that sort of exist? And so to your question earlier about data, you'll be able to see, is there an increase into Lpac scores? We'll be able to track the attendance data to see, are the things we're doing sort of providing making some type of change, right? And so all of that is, because we have Ms. Lambert in this position, we have the ability to look at it from a larger scale and to leverage the resources that are in the Ed Services Department to really do some of the work that sort of exists. And then, you know, as she said before, if after we look at the diagnostic data, we need additional assistance, there is still one more trick up our sleeve to provide schools with another shot or another infusion of resources that can help. So I do think we're talking about, you know, sort of RTI on steroids, but in a way that sort of didn't exist if we didn't have this type of funding. It's really a creative idea that encompasses a lot of things, from professional development to the pacing guide, all the way down to actual, you know, people on the ground and activities that are going to occur with kids that we can monitor throughout the year to see how they're improving.
Thank you. No, I definitely get all of that. I just want to make sure that we also make sure to include our parents in the conversation too.
Right. Oh, and so that's the other piece. So one of the things we did is we added at-risk coordinators at every single site who can assist with this outreach. We have the SCEPs at every single site, right? And then obviously the principals know. So I think, you know, by having all this data up front, there's an ability to really plan for outreach. And then one of the attractive things about having Ms. Lambert into this role is that she does speak Spanish and she does have connections. And, you know, she identified Castro as one of the schools that you know, sort of had the most standards where kids needed some work. Well, the fact that A, she knows the parents, and B, that she also can do outreach for the community that you're talking about, it gives us a leg up on making sure that we can go out there. And then you have, you know, not only her, but you have Director Chang, who can also deploy other people to do it. So it's not just all falling on the teachers. It's really going to have to be a community approach that includes our at-risk supervisors, our SCEPs, our principals, and as well as teachers and other officers. So I do think we'll be able to do a lot more outreach than what we have in the past. And there still are some additional funds that are sitting there for different types of initiatives just like this, in the event that we need to pull a couple more triggers if we're not seeing success.
Great, that's wonderful to hear. And Ms. Lambert, I'm glad you're in this role and you know the family so well. So thank you for the presentation.
Ms. Berman, if I can add to what Dr. Rudolph and Ms. Lambert have said. So something that we've been talking at our end in Ed Services has been to have cross-referencing of data like Ms. Lambert presented today. So not just using iReady as the only data point, but also looking at student engagement data and reading that story behind each of those data points and having an accountability sheet to track how we're looking at different data metrics, but also how many times are we reaching out to the parents? What was the response? What is the follow-up going to be? So this is, Dr. Rudolph said it perfectly. This is like support and RTI on steroids, but this is not something we have done before, but we really want to cross-reference data points and provide support for families and follow up as a triage team as well. So we'll have sheets for accountability for following up with families.
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
Trustee Chang.
Thank you. 6 questions, but I'll just do 3 now and then 3 afterwards. First question has to do with, relates to this question about getting data from about engagement. I recall when I look at the district website, I see that 2 years ago, we used to use Panorama for our district climate surveys. And those Panorama surveys would ask questions of kids asking, do they feel there's a relationship, do they have a relationship with their teachers? And teachers were asked, do they feel efficacy in their work? I don't see surveys beyond 2019. So do we no longer use the Panorama survey to collect that engagement data? And if not, what's the replacement in the last 2 years for that?
So I can answer that. Trustee Chang, we do not use Panorama, but we took all of those questions and they are in our LCAP climate survey. So we can collect that data. We took the majority of those questions out of Panorama and added into our LCAP survey so that we could make sure to capture data about student engagement and readiness and all of that. So yes, we do have that.
And just, sorry, just for history, this is one of the duplicate services that we had. And so we went through budgetary reductions. This is one of the things that we felt like that could be reabsorbed and put into a service that we were already having. So instead of doing 2 to 3 surveys, we combined our surveys into one in order to find some cost efficiencies.
Thank you for that context. The second question has to do with we have some students who have been some at-risk students who have been with us since kindergarten all the way through, and all the way up, possibly all the way to 8th grade. Do we ever parse out the data just to look at our lifelong students, or who may be classified in one of the categories that we are concerned about? Do we ever pull them out and just look at them and see their growth?
When I know as a principal, I'm sure other principals as well, we do look at the history of the student and see, is this a new phenomena or is it a chronic? And that speaks to what resources we need to offer. This data is not historical, but I know at the site level, it's usually one of the things that's looked at.
Trustee Chang, yes, that is correct. If I may add to what Ms. Lambert said, we do look at students that are long-term English language learners, what supports have been provided. So that data is looked at and referenced at site level, yes.
And then there's also goals within the LCAP as well as within specific site plans that address the strategic reduction of LTALs at a particular site. And I want to say that our goal for L is to, I know there's a specific goal by the number of students that we have at middle school that was adopted by the board a couple of years ago. And I want to say it was either 80 or 90% or something like that. And I remember that there was a debate about whether or not it should be higher or lower because of that year, the percent of students that occurred. But those are both goals that are outlined in the LCAP as well as in the site plans. And each school is specifically held accountable for that.
Thank you. And when principals look at their site data to look at those historic trends, do they align with kind of just the overall trend, or are there discrepancies? Like when you look at the average kind of mastery per grade level, and then you look at the kids who have been with us every single grade level, is it about the same statistics, or are there large deviations?
That would be difficult to say in like a general sense, because the number of students or the number of LTALs or students that are at risk of LTALs varies by site, by grade level. So a deeper dive at the individual student level gives an idea of a trend, if I may say. So it would be hard for us to put it out right now as a generic statement.
Thank you, Trustee Chang. Is that your 3?
Oh, just last third question for now. I just RTI teachers of the budget. Once the grant is complete, do we know where those teachers that we hire for RTI, where do they go once the grant's complete?
When personnel are hired out of grant funds, it's a temporary classification, and then each year Ms. Vicjord would determine whether they would be able to continue or not.
Like, are these going to be TOSAs who are kind of like tenured and they just go back into regular teaching assignment, or would these be teachers who would be released if the funding is not continued? Or
I think so. Typically in the budget iterative process, as we start to look at the effectiveness of programs, we'll make a determination as to whether or not this is something that continues on. And obviously we'll bring that data to the board as we get closer to the end of the funding over the next 2 years, because it is possible that this is something similar to the way RTI started out. It is possible that it becomes something that is ingrained in sort of our practices. But in terms of what happens with the teachers, they're hired first as temporary teachers. And that's just because of the nature of the job. And then of course that it can be teacher on special assignments next year because this plan came after the actual sort of development of the budget and sort of allocation of positions. So next year it could be a teacher on special assignment, which means that they could come from anywhere. And then, as we look at the data and we examine the effectiveness of what's taken place, it's possible that we may come back and say, at the sites where you're seeing the highest number. So, in terms of what Ms. Lambert said earlier, where there's a need for additional RTI teachers or additional support because the number of unduplicated students or the number of at-risk students is so great. That could be part of the board's strategy to say, this is exactly what we want to do. What we don't want to do is just toss money at the particular problem. We really want to have a process where we're saying, where the board is asking, is this really an effective program? And we have the data to sort of back up, yes, this is having some type of specific impact. Sometimes the gathering of the data may take longer. Like obviously you shouldn't expect to see, while we all want to see drastic changes in 1 year's time, we should all, a kid that's 2 grade levels behind, it's going to take some time to sort of catch them back up. But what we do want to see is trends upwards, and we want to make sure that we're moving them forward. And so we'll present that information to the board, and we'll cook it in, we'll sort of bridge it with our budgetary process. And then at that time, the board can say, yes, this is an appropriate expenditure because it will be new, or the board will say, no, this isn't something that we want to spend our time on because we've tried it over the last couple of years and we haven't seen any success. And so now that these funds are sort of disappearing, we'll go back to business as usual and we'll try something different. And that's typically the iterative process that we've been using, so that we can definitely justify the expenditures as they go.
Thank you.
Trustee Blake, Vice President Blakely.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. The presentation is about learning recovery. And I think you started off saying that we target the kids that are at, above, and below grade level. And so it seems to me that the vast majority of this is targeted at the kids that are below grade level, which I think is appropriate. But I'm wondering, what are we doing for the kids that are at grade level? I know there's some tutoring for K-2, but I'm sort of struggling to understand why we would do tutoring for the kids if they're at grade level. And then I know I think you said 3 to 5, it was a sort of on-demand, like hotline tutoring, but I'm just wondering how those kids fit in. Historically, our RTI has been focused, on giving each kid what they need at their level. And so how are we going to meet the needs of the kids that are not struggling?
I have a 2-part answer to that. So to the levels of intensity that I was explaining. So there are students in the green that did not make their expected annual growth. So even though they're in the green, they didn't make as much growth as they could have. And so therefore they deserve attention as well. And so that's why they're in that model. And for RTI is for students that need support in the skills, but it's also for students who need enrichment. So that time of the day is for all levels of students. They may need enrichment or some mild support or more intensive support.
So we will still have an enrichment component of the programming.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. And then somebody had asked, it wasn't me, but in the questions, and also the Kinsey report, it talked about the social emotional learning and depression. And it sounds like we're still trying to figure that out, but I'm wondering, do we have any programming that's planned in that area, or is that coming soon?
Director Jimbo or Dr. Rudolph will be addressing that.
So when?
Yeah, so the district has identified implementing a competency-based SEL model, part of goal 2 out of the strategic plan. We are tackling that, entering into that with committee formation right now. And the committee will be working on that, initiating that this year.
The second aspect of this is that sites were instructed to go back to their root cause analysis that they did last year. and that they are to develop a plan of action utilizing, so we've identified this year, each site is being given $120 per student. And so they, the first $20 was used, $20 per student was given to them for orientation and sort of welcoming back sort of activities, because we had so many kids coming back who hadn't been on campus. But the next one, $100 that will be used this year, is for sites to look at the needs assessment that parents, site councils, PTAs, and teachers sort of worked on and identified here are the needs, and then to develop a plan of action that's actually will be captured in the site plan that says here are the deliverables that we're looking for. And so while we have Ms. Director Jimbo working on, district level activities, you have individual sites that have the capability of over the next 2 years, utilizing funds to pay for activities that are site specific, that address also the social emotional learning needs that were identified earlier towards the end of the year.
Okay, thank you. And I know there's learning less, and I know, the kids need to learn. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line goal one, that's why we're in business. But I worry a little bit about like so much extra just focus on learning. Is there going to be any fun in the day, or any focus on how to make the lessons engaging so that the students want to learn? I get a little concerned that it's going to be just too much pure academics.
Well, if you know something about me, I love to have fun while we're working. So our coaches are much like me as well. And as well as the direction that we're going into is learning is effective when it is engaging. And that's the big part. And it's engaging when we have give kids choice and voice. It's also engaging when we differentiate it to their needs. So if you want to engage me as a student, I would love to be engaged in some kind of hands-on learning and then reflect. If you want to engage another student, maybe that student learns another way. Or maybe I need a little more challenging activity. So keeping all of these things in mind, Trustee Bakley, we provided some professional development on differentiation. We had the first basic differentiation training, foundation of differentiation. And we'll continue to provide our teachers with professional development, how to differentiate for students that they have. So think of their students, look at their student data, but also build in activities to support students where they are and get some engaging and fun activities for them as well.
Scantron for everyone.
No, Dr. Rudolph, no.
Scantron for just fill in the bubbles. Right? No art, no soup for you.
No.
I'm glad to hear that. I look forward to seeing it in action. Thank you.
All right. And I do want to point out that the SEL funds that were given to sites, it's not just about because they can use it for extended learning or they can use it for social emotional. Like it really is for each site to think about, to look at that needs assessment and to really identify what are the things that are really going to make people feel connected to the school, because we know that's also a central part of student success. And so the idea here is that we're not just focused on the academics, even though we are focused on the academics, but we really are trying to look at the whole picture and trying to address all the needs that sort of exist. And we've even been looking at different professional development that is, focused on sort of engaging activities, sort of reimagining how we think about mastering content, to also help teachers sort of present in a different way. And it's not to say that the way they're not presenting, that they're currently presenting is poor. It's just simply to say that, kids have been in front of a screen for X amount of time. And so, they're used to learning a different way. And so, maybe the way that we've been teaching isn't the most conducive way. And are there some other strategies that we can use? Because we really, over the last 18 months, have empowered students to sort of be at the center of their own learning by providing the device to them. And because they have this device, we shouldn't just shut it off because they walk back in the door. Instead, we should try to find ways to embrace it, but not just to make them dependent on the device, but to embrace the fact that they've been empowered to look for answers on their own and to really enjoy learning. And I think that's really going to be central to the work we do over the next 2 years, which is why we didn't just toss all the money at once at the sites. We spread it out over 2 years so that it really is, a ongoing process as opposed to a one and done.
Thank you.
So I have just 2 quick questions. One, something that we talked a lot about last spring, along with developing a social emotional learning curriculum, adopting something, was training our teachers in trauma-informed practices before or early in the school year, because we know all of our children, regardless of their academic levels, have been through trauma this year. We also know pretty much everyone on staff has. And with the Delta variant springing back up, I'm hearing a lot of stories that are almost like PTSD for families and other community members. So I'm curious about what we're doing now to meet the emotional needs and the trauma that our community has experienced.
So first step, in our August PD really did, while it wasn't entitled trauma informed, what we did talk about and work on were individual skills as well as collectively building safe spaces, safe and healthy spaces. And so a lot of the skills that are needed relative to trauma informed care, that was what are everyday practices that we can do. The other piece of this is looking at a needs assessment to really identify where we start and where we go to. And that's the next step. In addition to examining the data from our professional development surveys that we had our participants complete, examining that data, the department directors are going to actually cross collaborate on that and do a kind of a data chat ourselves and figure out what's next for our teachers.
Thank you. I think that's a real challenge because we don't have trauma data, right? Like that's not something that, so these other solutions with data that we can pull, we can do data-oriented solutions, but I'm really worried about losing sight of the struggle that our community has been through and supporting children through that now, immediately by supporting our teachers who are dealing with them. My second question is, I definitely understand that we want to keep using the devices that we've provided for students, but I was a little surprised that the intensive tutoring for K-2 is virtual, because those are the grade levels that struggled the most, especially K1, with being virtual. And it took a lot of it depended on parent skill. It depended on our students who are housing unstable, for example, our homeless students, continuing to do intensive virtual tutoring 3 times a week. I'm really worried about that. I'm wondering if you can speak to how that decision, what went into that decision, because I'm sure there were reasons, and how we're going to, I'm very curious about how we can bring kids onto campus for that tutoring if possible, even if it's online.
Right. So right now we're focusing on virtual while all of the safety practices are in place. However, both the companies are able to recruit in-person tutors in our area as well, and we can morph into that as the conditions become more amenable to that. And I think we're very fortunate that we can provide for 870 students in our current partners to receive the in-person help as well. And as you mentioned, that having a target group of students stay after school to do their virtual tutoring, so they're supported in that. And also worth talking about is this is one-to-one tutoring in many cases, which it's much easier to engage a 5, 6, 7-year-old in a one-to-one versus a whole class situation online.
That makes sense. I look forward to hearing at a future presentation about the targeted group that is able to stay on campus after school. And how that's determined and how large it is, I think that that's a worthwhile investment in extending that school day for those children and having somebody to support them while they're online at those early years in particular. And then Trustee Chang, back to you.
Thank you. Just 2 questions left. The other was already addressed by the fellow board members. The time the tutors meet with students, is it primarily the time they're at home? Like it would be like after school hours?
Yes, primarily because we don't want to pull them from core instruction and create more gaps. But the scheduling is flexible, but definitely as a general rule, it would be outside of regular school hours.
And would the students who utilize this would be different students than the ones who receive some type of tutoring in person at like Beyond the Bell or YMCA, or like, so is this like a different pool than the students who are on campus after school?
Yes. There is a possibility that a student could double up, but the definite priority is for those who aren't with the current partners because they're tutoring it in their partner.
And the tutor, do these companies have, last question, just do they have linguistic kind of flexibility in how they provide tutoring? What's the company's kind of agileness in languages other than English?
In the delivering of the tutoring itself, it would be in English, but both of them have capability to communicate with the families in multiple languages.
Thank you.
If there are no further questions from trustees, we will take public comment on this item. If you're a member of the public and you would like to comment, you can raise your hand in Zoom using the raise hand function, or you can press *9 on your phone. All right, we have one person who would like to comment. We will get a timer up for 3 minutes. All right, speaker, you may unmute yourself and address the board.
Hi, I have a quick question regarding the tutoring service. So how does parents get, like, if they feel like their kids need help, are they only qualified based on the recommendation of the teachers, or how does how does parent enroll their kids in this kind of help?
So one of the challenges here is that public comment is not a back and forth discussion with the board where the public asks questions and the board or staff answer them. It is a time to share a comment or feedback for the board. So
Okay.
that's something that we should definitely consider. Thank you. My understanding is that these students will be identified at the school sites based on their needs. Are there further comments from trustees? Vice President Blakely, I'm trying to make sure I remember that.
It's fine. I just wanted to thank everybody for all the hard work that went into this. Obviously, this took, a lot of work this summer, and I really appreciate it. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed that the dividends pay off. So we'll be watching. Thank you.
I'd also like to say that the thoroughness of the presentation was very much appreciated. I did look at all of that data, and it meant that I didn't come into this with data questions. But it was extremely helpful to understand the goals that the programs are working towards and to help inform me as a board member. So thank you for that thoroughness. Right, is there a motion from trustees? Trustee Chang.
Just a comment. I'll try and make it brief. That when I welcome the district when they look at when they're implementing this grant, that like it's not meant to try to eliminate the achievement gap with $3 million, which in 2 years. Or I think that a really worthy goal is that we're just trying to heal the kids from the pandemic. So we aren't trying to undo a life of challenges, vulnerabilities, but we're trying to, if we can identify what were the things we lost in the last year and a half, and $3 million there, I feel like we can do that. It's like if we in our mind just think this is to undo that, I think that gives us the right frame for success versus if we we always strive to eliminate the achievement gap, and that is one of the best missions of our district. But this money alone won't do that. Related to that, I really appreciate the feedback from President Connolly and Vice President Blakely about perhaps not in this grant, but this thing about if our goal is to heal the kids, then PD on trauma-based instruction for teachers and social emotional development for the kids. Those are all things where our kids, they broke a little bit over this last year and a half. And so maybe not through this, but I'm really glad that our colleagues said that because I think that that's there. And just the last one, just on a technical side, I loved how the data on the presentation that was provided and the slides, which are online, because I know parents may have, they may have first time they've seen this, but then the board, we got this in advance, but you can go to the district website and see. I love that it was broken down by school site. And I love that the panoramic data surveys that we used to do that as well. So it's harder, and maybe I'm just having to learn how to decipher through the LCAP survey data that's given to the board. But it used to be, when we got the panorama data, it was really easy to see, oh, teachers at this school are concerned about PD, or kids at this school are concerned about relationships with their teachers, or these teachers feel like they feel worried about the efficacy. And that was all broken down by school sites, very similar to the presentation today. But then the LCAP, when we get that, even though it's asking the same questions, the data is district-wide, at least when it comes to the board. So I liked that it was broken out this time. Thank you.
Ms. Bauer, did you have a comment on that?
I was just going to say that we do have the LCAP data by site, and the sites all have it, but I will take that, and that's a great suggestion as we move forward. So thank you.
I know I saw it at Mistral, for example. Any of the PTA meetings and the school site council meetings, it gets rolled out at the school site level with the school site level data to parents there, which is really helpful. On that note, is there a motion, Vice President Blakely?
I move that the board approves the Learning Recovery Plan, contract for FEV Tutor, Inc., contract for Air Tutors, and the professional service agreement for Paper Inc. as presented.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? On a motion made by Vice President Blakely and seconded by Trustee Wheeler, the board votes unanimously to approve the Learning Recovery Plan, contract for FEB Tutoro, Inc., contract for Air Tutors, and the professional service agreement for Paper Inc. as presented. Thank you. Our next item is going to be pretty weighty. Should we take a bio break before we move on to review and discussion, trustees? All right, let's take 5 minutes. We will come back at 7:47.
You are.
All right, welcome back, trustees. We will now move on to item 9A, Community Facilities District Planning and Boundaries Options, with Dr. Rudolph and Dr. Westover, our Chief Business Officer, and Charles Heath and Lynn Gruber. Welcome.
Good evening, thank you. We also have Phil Henderson here to answer any questions that the board might have. This presentation is at the request of the board for us to come back to you and discuss the feasibility of a CFD. And this is to address the growth that's occurring in Mountain View over the next several years. And then I'll turn it over to Charles and Lynn.
Sure thing. Thanks, Dr. Westover. Let me just share my screen here and we'll jump into our presentation. There we go. Everyone can see the presentation now? All right, excellent. So thank you for some time this evening. Over the last few months, we've been working closely with the district's financial advisors and legal counsel to evaluate different potential approaches for how we might generate the revenue that would be needed to offset the impacts of the proposed development, primarily in the North Bayshore and East Westman areas of your district. The primary tool that California school districts and other public agencies tend to use in order to offset the impacts of proposed development is what's called the Community Facility Districts Law. And that tool provides some flexible approaches for how we both define the area that would potentially be impacted by the proposed development, but also a fairly flexible set of financing tools for how we determine a tax structure that fairly allocates those costs between existing development, new development, different types of development that may generate different levels of student enrollment in your schools. So what we wanted to do tonight is to share with you sort of our work to date, which I want to emphasize is fairly preliminary, right? We've taken a look at the areas proposed for development and what those impacts might look like on your current attendance areas. And Lynn is going to walk through some of the analysis that she's done in terms of the financial planning. This is kind of a first cut at how we might structure the special tax to deliver the revenue that would be needed to address both facility and ongoing operational needs derived from that expected growth. And then we've also looked at potential ways that you might construct those CFD boundaries and sort of done an analysis of the voters that reside in those areas, because ultimately the CFD proposal would need to go to a vote. And as long as there are more than 12 registered voters in the proposed CFD area, it would be a 2/3 vote of the registered voters within that area. So after Lynn summarizes her financial modeling here, then I'll come back and talk a little bit about those different potential boundary constructions, and then we can talk about next steps for pushing the process forward. So Lynn, I will hand it off to you.
Great, thanks. Go ahead and go to the next slide.
Oops, I jumped one ahead, sorry. There we
go. All right, as Charles was saying, the special tax has some flexibility but it should be calculated on a reasonable basis based upon the facilities. It may have different rate structures based on the development status. So that means, you know, if you have permitted structures, may be taxed at a different rate than undeveloped lots and that kind of idea. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So what we did was looked at the existing units that are already in existence within the district. And we determined those by purchasing the county data from the auditor controller. And so we determined the number of units and their land use class. And then for the new units, we determined the special tax based on the student generation factor that was calculated in the 2020 fee justification study. We're just about ready to get to another cycle in 2022 for a new fee justification study, but the 2020 was the most recent fee study that we had. So we determined through the review of the City of Mountain View's planning department, as well as the fee justification study, that including or excluding, I should say, on top of the North Bay Shore and East Westman plans, there would be about 1,140 additional multifamily units and additional 740 condominiums newly built within the district boundaries. And those are all north of the expressway. And go ahead with the next slide. So we created 2 study areas. We looked at the district-wide, and then we looked north of the expressway. And the reason we chose north of the expressway was it generally fell in line with the student attendance boundaries of the schools that would service that north area. We calculated a special tax for single family residential, so an unattached home, what we would call a detached single family residential of $49 or $99 on an annual basis. And then again, for new units, we calculated their special taxes based on the student generation rates by unit type. So single family residential has a different rate than multifamily residential. And then the new units were calculated to fund the remaining facilities needs based on the district's needs. I can go to the next slide. So we developed 2 possible rate structures. This is the district-wide rate structure. You can see on the first column, we detail out the type of unit. So we have single family unattached. The county data also had single family unattached with an accessory dwelling unit. So I know accessory dwelling units are becoming more and more common. We can treat those a little bit differently. In this case, we just treated them with one unit. And then a townhome or condo, single family attached, and multifamily units or apartments. The new units, this structure looks familiar probably to you. We have a market rate apartments, market rate condominiums or townhomes. So the differential there being a for sale type of unit rather than for rent. The apartments would be more, the top line apartments are more the studio. And then the market rate 1 to 3 bedroom apartments, so bigger units, and 1 to 3 bedroom condo or townhome. And then we had the same categories, but for the below market rate units as well. The second column details the unit counts in each of those categories, the annual special tax that a property owner would pay on each unit. At the $49 for existing single family unattached units. And then a townhome or condo would be about $12 per year and $30 per year for the multifamily. And again, those are based on student generation rates. We do have flexibility there. that we could treat each existing unit at the same level. They each could be charged $49. That's something that we can discuss and change as we move forward through the process. Then the last column, I'm sorry. And then the new units would have a special tax range of a low of $644 up to the market rate larger condos and townhomes of about $5,700 per year. And those would be annual taxes. Then the last column in this table is if we created a district-wide structure at $99 per unit for the single family unattached unit, going to $24 for the townhome or condominium, and $61 per year per apartment. Those then create a special tax range for the new units of $629 to the highest rate of about $5,600 per unit for the new units. The next slide. This graphically shows the area that we looked at for north of the expressway. The next slide. This is the rate structure similar to the slide before last. So if we look at only the units that are included north of the expressway, we would have fewer units. Again, for the existing units, we would have a $49 and a $99 structure. But then down below, our new units would have a little bit higher range of $652 per unit for the below market rate apartment, up to the market rate larger 1 to 3 bedroom condominium or townhome of $5,795, so about $5,800 per year. Then with the $99 per year rate structure from approximately $645 for the below market rate apartment up to $5,734 for the market rate condominium or townhome. And then I think it goes back to Charles.
Okay, so that's a look at sort of the financial modeling about how rates could be structured. There's obviously a lot of variables to be played with there before we arrive at a final structure. I think the second piece that we want to look at here is just the geographic area that would be considered for inclusion within the CFD boundaries. And as Lynn described, she's looked at kind of that north of the expressway option versus the district-wide option. And so we've taken the same areas here and performed an analysis of the voters in those areas. So starting off by looking at the north of the expressway area, there are just shy of 15,000 registered voters in that area currently, who live in about just shy of 9,000 households. We looked at the voter participation of that group in the recent November 2020 presidential election. High level of participation, almost 90% of the voters in that area did vote. We wanted to take a look at a more detailed demographic breakdown of who those voters are based on partisanship, based on age, based on ethnicity. We looked at all those factors, and interestingly, that north of the expressway area aligns pretty closely demographically with the voter demographics of your district as a whole. So when you isolate that area, it's not like it skews to one specific age group or partisan group or ethnic group as compared to others. We looked at one slight variation on this approach, which is instead of using the expressway as the kind of the boundary or demarcation, we could also follow your existing attendance boundaries in order to, more carefully isolate those areas that would be directly impacted by the proposed development. And we understand that Montaloma, Crittenden, Therakoff, and Vargas are kind of the primary attendance areas that would be impacted here. So ultimately, the numbers look very similar when we follow the attendance boundaries. Again, there's about 14,700 voters in that area, a little less than 9,000 households, similar level of voter participation. And again, the demographics of the voters in that area sort of align pretty closely with the demographics of the district as a whole. One potential downside that I can think of using the attendance boundaries as your your boundaries for the CFD is that they do change, right? They're not fixed boundaries. And so they may not stand the test of time as much as using some more permanent boundaries to define your boundaries. And then the last option that we looked at here, again, consistent with Lynn's analysis, was looking at the district-wide approach. I think one potential advantage here is that if you were to set up a district-wide CFD, you would basically have a mechanism for assessing attacks against any new development in your district, not just in the currently proposed areas. So it would kind of set forth a policy that could endure going forward. Of course, the downside is that this would include voters potentially that aren't as directly impacted in the near term on the proposed development. So you'd have to build a case for why there's a justification for including all the voters in your district. But district-wide, there's a little over 34,000 registered voters that live in about 20,000 households. Again, strong participation in the most recent election, so voters are highly engaged. And the demographics, again, look similar to what they do in the sub areas that we analyzed in terms of age, ethnicity, and partisanship. So really, this analysis was designed just to kind of understand the electorate that we would be working with if we did propose a CFD in each of these areas. And there aren't stark demographic differences as we kind of change those boundaries. It's a pretty similar group of voters. Obviously, the district-wide group is about twice the size as the north of the expressway or following the attendance boundaries option. So in terms of next steps, we have the beginnings of a potential model for how a special tax might be assessed. We have some different options for the area that might be included in the CFD. And sort of following the process that we've used for past successful bond and parcel tax measures in the district, what we recommend doing from here is to engage in a feasibility study where we can present some of these options both to voters at large and through the form of some opinion polling, test various tax rates, test kind of the rationale for how you might construct the CFD and how voters feel about who should participate at what levels in offsetting the impacts of development. And then based on that research and that input, we can bring some more refined options and recommendations back to you and get some direction from the board. Assuming we're sort of honing in on a specific direction here, that's when we could start doing some outreach in the community to try to build consensus among key stakeholders, parent groups, the business community, potential developers, all the various folks that have an interest in this project and the future of the schools. Based on that feedback, we can then bring back a proposed measure with ballot language. The ballot language for a CFD looks a little bit different than what you're used to with bonds and parcel tax measures, just in terms of what's legally required to be specified in that language. And there's also a process that has to be carried out to adopt the boundaries and provide notice to the community about the creation of this CFD. But we would develop a timeline for that based on that feasibility study once we've identified the appropriate election timing and a target election date for the measure. And then, of course, if the board does vote to call for the election and put the measure on the ballot, then we would need an advocacy effort like we've had for our past bond and parcel taxes to generate that 2/3 support required for approval. District resources can't be used for that last stage. That would have to be privately coordinated and privately funded. So that's kind of a general process description, but in terms of the immediate next steps, I think obviously the statewide recall election is going to heavily influence voters here over the next month or so. But following the recall, as we get into the later fall months, I think that provides an open window to do some of the survey research, working in conjunction with the polling firm to gather a statistically reliable understanding of people's attitudes about a potential CFD, and then bring some options and recommendations back to you probably around the end of the year, so that we can begin working on a potential 2022 ballot proposal if that seems viable based on our research. So that is what we have to share this evening, and I'll stop sharing my screen. And I think both Lynn and I are happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Are there questions from trustees? Trustee Wheeler.
Yeah, so fascinating report, and thank you. What would be the voter rationale for voting for it?
Well, I mean, kind of the operating logic behind, the options we've shared with you tonight are that, existing development in the community should pay a modest amount towards, ensuring that you have the facilities and budget necessary to continue offering top-rate education for your students as these new developments come online and the schools are impacted by growing enrollment. But obviously the rate structure is weighted towards those new developments so that new units would pay significantly more for the students that they're generating. So I think that the rationale we would try to present to voters is that this is a fair structure where, existing residents pay a little and new residents pay more. But it makes sure that we have adequate resources so that our schools aren't negatively impacted by growth.
And then another question, and you said this isn't like bond or parcel tax, so I don't know the answer to this. What about senior exemptions?
I'll defer to Phil, but I'm pretty sure that we can offer senior exemptions as part of the CFD rate methodology.
Yes,
Yes,
we can. If it's written into the documentation, they can be offered.
Lynn's correct, as usual.
Vice President Blakely.
I have a bunch of questions. Hopefully they're short. One is in terms of the timing, when you talk about new versus existing, is new anything that permits are pulled for after the measure were adopted, if it were to be adopted?
So as part of the formation process, we would craft what's called a rate and method of apportionment. That document lays out the date by which they would be considered a new unit versus an existing unit. The data that we looked at was kind of earlier this spring, so it's going to change, obviously. So we would create that date probably closer to the time of formation, and it usually would be around the end of May or the beginning of June of a fiscal year. So if we were to go for a November 22 ballot, maybe it would be prior to June 1st of 2022 would be considered existing, and anything built after that would be considered new. I think we also have to look and make sure that, we're catching all the new development, as much of it as we can. The North Bay Shore and East Westman are significant new developments. So we want to make sure that we catch as much of those as we can and take that into consideration as we craft the document.
So basically it's around the time, give or take a few months, that the measure is adopted, is the cutoff.
Yes, and we also take into consideration the time frame in which we have to place taxes onto the tax bill, and that's in the August time frame. So you have to kind of go back a couple of months to give time for preparation of the tax roll. So usually it's around the end of May or the beginning of June of a fiscal year.
But the longer we wait, the more units we lose out on.
That's right.
That's really where I was going. Okay.
Yeah.
And as far as the election timing goes, would November 2022 probably be the most likely candidate if we wanted to move forward soon? I mean, or do you sometimes schedule a special election for this? I know those are more expensive.
Yeah, well, we have a lot of flexibility again in the CFD law for when you call these elections. Certainly special elections are on the table. And one of the things we would be looking at in that survey research is to understand how support levels are tied to potential voter turnout. Obviously, as we look ahead to 2022, the gubernatorial general election in November is likely to generate the highest turnout. The primary turnout's expected to be lower, and then the special election would be less than that. So, only if we saw a significant advantage associated with the special election and the costs come to that would we go that route. So I think just in terms of, for general planning purposes, November 22 is a good target. And that basically gives us essentially a year from now through basically next June, July to fine tune the details, conduct the informational outreach that I talked about, and be ready to move into a campaign.
And then you'd mentioned, thank you, you'd mentioned that the tax would be more modest, I think was the terminology used for the existing units. Is it possible to make it even more modest than what was shown on the slides, like maybe $25 a unit? Or do we run into trouble if we go below some threshold?
I think there's flexibility there, but Phil, I don't know if you want to weigh in on kind of any practical limitations there.
The ones that we've kind of entertained and had a number, we want to avoid it being so de minimis that it's a waiver, or not a waiver, that they're not contributing to the CFD being part of in that area. So Charles is right, there's some flexibility. We're going to be hesitant to go too low, frankly, but as this gets, as Charles, I think your term was fine-tuned, as we move along, let's see where that goes. But we don't want it to be too de minimis, not only for legal, but probably, frankly, perhaps for some political reasons too.
And my last question, and I think you may have covered this in a presentation in prior years, but I don't recall, how long, it's an annual tax, but how long is the term of the tax? Like, is it 20 years or 30 years or 60 years, or how long is that done?
CFD code says that you can tax for facilities for as long as 40 years.
40 is the cap. Okay, thank you.
Trustee Chang.
Thank you. A question on the slides that show the rates for when it's a district wide, and then when it shows for above the expressway. They seem to be the same, but one has a larger number of taxpayers. Why do the rates not change based on the change in pool?
Well, again, we're pulling a modest amount from existing units, so that helps to lower the rates for the new units. But you did see that it doesn't help to lower the rates very much.
Thank you. And then these are paid by the residents, right? Not by the developers?
They would be paid by the property owners. So in the case of apartments, whoever owns the apartments, of course, typically they're passed through the rent, but not they wouldn't pay the tax bill directly. They're collected on the regular county property tax bill.
So historically for other communities, thank you. Historically for other communities, what is the direct impact on currently proposed housing in the pipeline? Well, if we look at other communities, when a school or a government entity does this, when they do the Melrose, like, does it have an immediate, is there an immediate reaction in the housing market regarding housing supply?
That's a good question. You know, we haven't seen a district-wide or a large voter-approved CFD be approved for some time. I will say on the ones that we work on that were approved in the 90s, that there hasn't been an impact on the housing market. And in many of the areas that we work on, developers seek out Melrose districts to help with the financing of the fees that they need to pay to construct the facilities. So that's not a good answer for you. I don't think that directly answers your question, but that's what we have seen.
And we've not received any message from any current development saying that such action would make them stop building housing, right?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. I will say that, you know, we do a lot of developer fee studies as well. And a lot of times when we prepare the developer fee studies, bring them to the board, we always get someone from the Building Industry Association that comes and say that the increase of the developer fees is going to impact their ability to build homes and sell homes. But to date, we haven't shown that to bear fruit in real life.
Thank you.
Trustee Berman.
So I think you just alluded to the success rate of putting something like this on a ballot. In your experience, you know, what should we expect, or what have been some trends in getting something like this passed? And will doing a survey maybe inform us then of what's to come if we were to put this on a ballot?
Yeah, that's what the survey is designed to do, is to get a sense of how receptive the community is to this proposal, and then how do you also tinker with the various variables here in terms of tax rates and tax structure and boundaries to give yourself the best chance of success. Sort of the garden variety CFD approach is a little bit different because it's typically used in situations where you have new development that's often on raw land. There are no homeowners there yet, so there are no voters, and so it's more of a an approach where you're working collaboratively with the developer to generate these funds that would then be paid by future property taxpayers once the development comes online. This is a little bit different, and one of the complicating factors here is that when we look at the proposed development area, there are about 40 existing registered voters. So even if we narrowed this down just to the proposed development areas, there's more than 12 registered voters, which means it wouldn't be a landowner vote. It would have to be a registered voter-owned vote. And it seems sort of odd and complicated to me to limit this important decision to 40 individuals, which is why we're looking at how do we craft some boundaries in a logical way that includes the the impacted voters, the impacted taxpayers, but also assesses the cost burden in a fair and reasonable way.
Thank you.
Is it okay if I ask a question first, Trustee Chang, and then circle back? So the new market fees, is that tied to shovels in the ground on those developments? Is that tied toward when those units are first sold and considered complete? When does that go into effect?
Typically, it's based on when a permit for construction is issued.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so that is very soon. And then I know that we're going to need, it was a push to get Measure T across the finish line. And I know so many people worked so hard on that, especially Vice President Blakely. And I know we're going to need a parcel tax in the future. So because our parcel tax is not lasting forever. So I'm trying to figure out how all of this slots in together in terms of going to the voters.
Yeah, well, the parcel tax was last renewed in 2017 for 8 years. So that will expire in 2025. So we have a little bit of runway left before that proposal needs to go back to the voters. Obviously, we passed the bond measure recently, so hopefully that has refreshed your facility funding. So I think these are arguments for, given the timeline for potential development in these areas, trying to assess this and see if there's an option in the near term. Probably makes sense to ensure that the timeline doesn't start to conflict with the parcel tax renewal timeframe.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Chang.
2 questions. Regarding if there wasn't the expressway, if it was the freeway and the very few residents in that North Bay Shore, would that still be I recognize that it'd be strange for such a significant thing, so few voters. Would it be legal to have a small group there pass something of this size upon the future residents of the North Bay Shore?
I think it would be, Phil. I mean, that would be it would have to be a 2/3 vote of the qualified electors, and I think it would probably be those 40 people.
Yeah, I think it was 38 or 40 people but as you pointed out, is there a legal basis for doing that? I think the short answer is yes. Is there a practical and political reason to do it? The answer is probably no. In other words, it could backfire on it because having so few people make a decision, as Charles said, in such a large impact for that community. So I don't think that's what the statute was intended to be drafted for. And I would suspect BIA, who Lynn mentioned a few moments ago, would likely push back. That was intended to capture when you have a handful of developers in an area who want to work together on creating a CFD to develop it. We would be using it for a different purpose. Is that what the statute says? Yes. Would I expect some light and heat? Yes.
Now, the last question is, given that, imagine something like this, typically it's to pay for a facility, and in this case, a new school. If one is issuing, to purchase out front, do current interest rates impact the value to the taxpayer? So right now, interest rates are low, right? But then with inflation, things like that, could the could timing have some impact on how much value the taxpayers are getting and what they have to pay back?
It could. Also, the escalation of construction costs. So both of those are factors that could impact the amount of money that would be available for facilities.
Thank you.
All right. If there are no further questions from trustees, we're going to move to public comment. If you're a member of the public and you would like to comment on this item, you may raise your hand in Zoom, or you may press *9 on your phone. We appear to have one public comment, so we will get a 3-minute timer up. Mr. Lambert, you may unmute yourself and you will have 3 minutes.
Hi, thank you. Unfortunately, I don't have it's more like just some questions, but you can answer them or not, but online. I'm curious to know what the CFD money can be used for, and whether if it's voted on, is it a fixed amount for whatever time is indicated in the on the ballot. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. Always a pleasure to have former trustees join us. Are there further comments from trustees? Trustee Chang and then Trustee Wheeler.
So it's my understanding that things like this require 2/3, a supermajority. So I think that as we're looking at this decision and in the tight timeline, I think it's really important that we make sure we continue talking as a board to kind of flush this out. And so I guess to start that, like, I would really welcome it being on, if we do this, to be on where it has the highest voter turnout. I couldn't support us putting this on a ballot which would have a low turnout. I think, I guess it depends on how many voters are even in the size we scope. Related to that, as regarding size of this, I understand that notices can be longer and kind of almost open-ended in a sense. Like for me, I would really be interested in tying this to what is the facility cost of a new school, which is giant, right? So like we can't build a new school in North Bay Shore without pursuing something like this. And I think it'd be, I would feel most comfortable if we find out, as we get closer to this, find out what is that amount, and that's what we're asking for. So we're not trying to generate like some kind of additional revenue out of a particular part of Mountain View. We're just asking this part of Mountain View to pay for the school that these new residents will need. And I think that's fair to the voters. And so I hope that we can figure out that number and tie it to that instead of kind of an open-ended like amount. And I'm kind of torn about the North Bay Shore versus Central Expressway. You know, I recognize, I'm concerned about the idea that North Bay Shore, so few voters would legally be questionable, but I also recognize that that the residents in Monte Loma and things like that, they don't really, I mean, I understand that, you know, Wistman's a little different, there's a lot of housing coming up there, but like neighborhoods like Monte Loma, they're not having giant developments. Yet there are a large voter base in that that Central Expressway part. And they're also, it's a bit more complicated, that community, with other community issues going on right now. So like, I'm kind of torn about what side, who should be the voter for such a thing. Thank you.
Trustee Wheeler.
Yeah. So one thing Trustee Chang just said is something I agree with, which is I would like to see, if we do this election, that we do it in the November 2022 election and get, you know, a high number of voters compared to a special election. My main comment, I was looking at the maps that you were showing us in the rationale for north of Central Expressway, or by school boundaries, or by whole city. And so I'll cross off by school boundaries in my mind, because my reaction to that is that if I lived in those school areas and my school was called out, I would feel like we were being picked on compared to the rest of the city. Whereas, you know, as you showed us, it's similar when it's north of Central Expressway, but it just feels to me like it's a more fair tax. And I appreciated you presenting us with analysis for the whole city. One of the things we hear all the time now is the rest of the city doesn't feel connected to or care about the development that's going on in North Bayshore, north of Central Expressway. So my sense is, other than, you know, just diehard liberals who will vote for anything, there's a lot of people in the rest of the city who would feel like, you know, what's in it for me? I wouldn't vote for it. So I would recommend, you know, preliminarily, you know, if we do this, that we do north of Central Expressway. And to the question of north of Central versus north of 101, I'm uncomfortable with, you know, putting this on a small number of voters, you know, so have it be north of 101. And I feel like, you know, not only is that, you know, a huge decision on the shoulders of a few voters, but it just feels too tricky to me. So I keep using the word feel, but I feel like a north of Central Expressway area makes, you know, just sense.
Thank you, Trustee Wheeler. Other comments from trustees? Vice President Blakely.
Maybe this is also a question. I agree that we shouldn't do it by school areas, that is, but, you know, in part, Charles, for the reason that you articulated, that the boundaries, you know, may shift over time. But wouldn't that be something we would survey? You know, I know it's a different pool you're surveying if you're just looking at north of Central Expressway versus the whole city, but is that something that we would survey on and sort of play out both options?
Yeah, my plan for the survey was we would construct the sample broadly to represent the entire district. We would start there, but then we would also have subsamples that could represent these other potential boundary areas. And that way we can kind of compare head to head how voters in the different areas feel and validate whether it's true that voters in some portion of the district feel disconnected from the proposed development area. You know, we would just have the benefit of asking the questions of the voters to have real data to work with.
Okay, thank you. So I'm not entirely sure that I'm agnostic about which one, but I would certainly prefer to see how the data comes in and how the survey results look before making a decision in that regard. Also, we're not being asked this tonight, but if we do this, I want to give it the best possible odds of success. And so if that were a special election as opposed to the November 2022 election, I would be open to that. Again, I'd like to see what the survey results come back. But these elections are hard and they require a lot of shoe leather and knocking on a lot of doors. Hopefully we'll be able to do that at this point in time. We were kind of limited in the last election cycle, but you know, I want to give it every possible chance of success if we do move forward with it. And I'm glad we're looking into it because it seems like the other options are just really not on the table with the way the building industry has hamstrung the statutes limiting the city's ability to lever community development fees and just the development fees that we're entitled to, only covering maybe the cost of renting portables, but not the land or the construction costs. So we've got to be able to do something. And if this seems kind of draconian, but if that's what it takes, and that's what we need. The whole new RENA recommendations about more housing, and that housing will get built, but you've got to have the services that go along with it. And that includes schools for the kids that live in those units. And, you know, money doesn't grow on trees. So this is one way we can maybe access the funds. So I appreciate all that work.
That would be a great soundbite for the campaign, Laura.
Money doesn't grow on trees.
No, what she said before that.
No, I agree. Trustee, let me see. Trustee Berman, did you have anything to say first?
No, I'm just curious how soon we can get the survey out, or what does that look like? When do we get that information back? Because it seems like there's some information we need so that we can make some decisions moving forward.
Yep, certainly the survey is key for kind of taking the next steps here. I wouldn't recommend surveying in the midst of the recall, so I think we need to wait till September 14th passes and the dust settles from those issues a little bit. That way we'll have voters in more of a normal mindset, similar to what we might expect in 2022. But by late September, early October, I think we can be in the field collecting data. So I would say by the end of October, we can be back in front of you with some data and recommendations to share.
Thank you. And then I'll come back to you, Trustee Chang. So when we did the Measure T ballot, we did that during the primaries in a March election. And I'm trying to remember why we decided that was a better time than a regular election.
There was a few different reasons. One, that was a bond measure that only required a 55% vote, so the threshold was lower, right? And our polling suggested we could be successful in any number of elections. Also, the March 2020 election was a bit of an unusual one. It was, the first time California had a competitive primary election in quite some time, and so voter participation was higher in that primary compared to what we typically see. Looking ahead at 2022, I'd expect that the June primary will have pretty significantly lower turnout, just because the interest in the gubernatorial primary won't be what it was for, selecting who was going to take on Trump.
All right, thank you. And then
Trustee Conlon, there was also a concern about the number of measures and bonds that will be on the presidential election at the same time, and so we didn't want to get lost in all the noise that was coming out. I can't remember. I think the state ended up going on at the same time as us. But I remember there were a lot of other initiatives, RV bans and everything else that kept popping up on the presidential election, and we just also wanted to avoid it.
That's correct.
The California School Board Association had been talking about, going out for the full and fair funding for schools, and then ended up pulling back on that because there's a perception that schools have gotten a lot of money recently. And so voters weren't necessarily as interested in doing something that was going to send more money to schools because they feel like we've gotten all of this COVID response funding and we're flush with money. Trustee Wheeler, you're going to correct me. I said something wrong.
I actually think you're inflating a number of things.
Okay.
What happened is the Schools and Communities First, is that what it was called?
Well, that was, but I'm talking about this,
now. But I thought your question was about why we didn't do it before.
No, I've moved on to more recent history.
Yeah.
So previously, yes, Schools and Community First came up. So then CSBA kicked it down the road. But when we talked about whether it was going to come back this year, I'm thinking of like the Delegate Assembly, for example. We talked about, was it going to come back this year? And the answer was no.
And now the other measure, they're talking about bringing it back. So either in 2022 or 2024. So, this is not where we're going to talk, make up our minds about that. But
no, but it's more that I guess what I'm getting at is that the recent perception is that there's been quite a bit of funding for schools. And will that perception affect the survey? Probably. Will that perception still be with us in November 2022? I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
We are in a tough spot with this in the sense that, personally, I am pro housing development. I know we have a housing crisis in California, but at the same time, as Vice President Blakely pointed out, schools are part of infrastructure. We have to have schools for the children that housing brings us. And right now, we don't have good options for how to pay for building a school or 3 schools for new students that are going to result from this development. And so we're doing something that is going to get us tangled up a little bit in the housing debate. And I hate that we're in that position, but I also think it's vital that we do it, because we just have to have a place for the children to go. They have to have a school. Trustee Chang, you had a further comment?
Yes. When we were talking boundaries about, is it city, is it district wide, is it central, is it 101? One more boundary maybe for us to consider is, I recognize that above the 101, 40 people just sounds way too small. But if we just stretched it a little more to be just the communities that are going to be possibly impacted by the growth of housing in that area, by changes in boundaries, which I would think would also include, it would include where, Vargas cannot handle all the growth in that area. I feel like if we just broaden it to be, this is kind of a bit over the 101 to capture all the, largely in those 2 quadrants, I feel like that you begin to get to a larger voter base that maybe will not be so small, but also would be very intentional in that those are the people who are going to be impacted by this. Because I do worry that a district-wide one really is a referendum on housing growth, and really would be taken as an issue. We've seen our city council elections, how housing is the defining issue for that. I feel like a district-wide Melrose would be basically our fight of the housing issue, which has pretty much split Mountain View. Versus if we can, so I don't know if that's possible in the surveying of finding out if there is something that's bigger than north of 101, but north of 1 plus, the Wistman area. Just adding a few more hundred. I don't know. And the last part that I hope that at some point, I don't know where building community support for this falls, because I imagine like making sure that housing advocate groups and stuff feel good about what we're doing would be critical. Because like if we did this without their coordination and housing advocates said that what you're doing is going to freeze up the housing supply, I think that would be a really devastating loss of potential allies.
Vice President Blakely.
It's going to affect that whole area north of north of Central Expressway if the R3 densification measure goes through. I looked at some of those maps, you probably saw them too. That's going to be up and down the Theracott neighborhood. What is it? Mountain Shadows, Terabella, Montaloma. There's going to be just tons of infill in there, in addition to all of the developments, standalone developments that are already in the pipeline. So to me, it feels right to do it, at least to that larger area if we're going to do it. But, I'll be interested to see what the polling results show, the survey results. And it sounds from what Charles has said that you can kind of slice and dice depending on where people live that answer the survey. So you might be able to look at it from that perspective.
I also think when we have looked at in the past what the impacts of the student population would be, and we've been discussing where to put those kids for a couple of years now, it does impact Theracott, Montaloma, Crittenden, Vargas. It does stream that way, but that may mean, Trustee Chang, that we need to go over that more thoroughly again so that everyone understands why that Central Expressway cutoff was suggested in the first place.
I would say, like, if we are broadening the conversation to be beyond kind of the needs of North Bayshore, to kind of talk about the possible proposals by the City Council for densification at R3, I think that we really do need to then coordinate with the City Council as well then, because whether we want to or not, if we are talking on that scale, then what we're doing is a referendum on growth of housing in Mountain View. And that is something that the City Council is kind of their turf. So I think that if we vision this as kind of a, anticipating that, then we need to coordinate with them, because otherwise we could be killing either for or against, we could be shifting the destiny of what the city's long-term housing plan is. Go ahead.
I will say, I don't think we're actually, I think that it's quite feasible for the developers to do this within their building proposals. So I don't think we actually are going to be killing housing. And I think it's going to be seen as a referendum if you call it that. But it's any housing has to have infrastructure. It just does. It doesn't mean we're anti-housing. We can be pro-housing and pro-development, but our job is to make sure that piece of infrastructure is there. And right now we don't have money from the developers to do it. The city can't give us money to do it. And so, you know, that's not a referendum on housing. That's a referendum on how do we actually take care of our children.
But
Vice President Blakely.
Is it possible, I'd asked about whether you could lower the fees on the existing residences, and it sounds like there's some kind of threshold and $49 may be the one that fits. Would it be possible to lower the fees on new affordable housing below the numbers that were presented in the grid? Would that be something that would be doable? Because that then might, you know, have the measure dovetail with the city's goal of trying to provide more affordable housing. I know we want more housing in general, but in particular to make the affordable housing not so outrageous that it never gets built.
Yes, again, from a legal aspect, you certainly can. Again, it's the balloon effect, right? If your school costs X dollars and you've got to fund that, if you lower it on the below market rate, it will increase it on the market rate. But that is something we certainly can look at.
Thanks.
Trustee Berman and then Trustee Chang.
So it was mentioned that there could be this perception about there being a windfall of money for schools and how that could impact how people vote on a survey or what they're thinking. When we do a survey and it goes out to the community, is there sort of an explanation of, you know, what the justification is? Is there an area where that gets clarified for the community, you know, what we're asking for and why, and where we can address, you know, potentially what that misconception could be, that we can't use those funds that have been coming to the school districts to build new schools. So I'm wondering, you know, a little bit more about that survey, if you can talk to that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and some of that contextual information will be provided. So in the past, whatever it is, 20 years that we've been doing surveys for the school district, we've consistently always asked a question about the perception of need for additional funding. And so we can ask that question in this survey and see how that compares kind of over the history of the polls to see how this current situation relates to, you know, to past situations and, you know, whether or not we were successful in those funding elections. But yeah, over the course of the survey, in addition to asking specific questions about the proposed CFD measure, we'll also present information, you know, the kind of information that you would hear from the school district, the kind of information you might hear from opponents, the kind of information you might hear from proponents, and that will sort of simulate the kind of discussion and debate that occurs over the course of the election. And that way, you know, voters are providing opinions that are influenced by the same kind of information that they would hear over the course of the campaign.
So I'm assuming that survey will include some of the discussion around housing that we've been having here ourselves.
Absolutely. Yep.
That will be a very useful survey. Trustee Chang.
Oh, thank you. I understand that developers don't pay this, but I think that the amount on market rate homes is sizable, right? So like if it's $2,000 on an apartment, you know, that's like $200 extra a month on rent, or if it's, you know, $5,000-$6,000 on a new condo in their, you know, in their tax bill annually. That, like, those are things I think that housing advocates will see as something that could chill, you know, people's ability to make this affordable place to live in the middle ground, right? Because like we have affordable housing, which we've been wonderful in advocating for, and then there's housing for people who can buy whatever, you know. But in like in Mountain View, a lot of residents are concerned about that donut in the middle, where they're not in the affordable housing area and can't afford anything they want. So I just want to make sure we don't lose like sight of that. And I love this idea that when we say that we are just going out there to Mountain View is going to build a whole new neighborhood in North Bayshore, then they need a school. And then that's what this is for. And it aligns with what we said in Measure T. We are very clear with Measure T, and we've been carrying through that Measure T is not for a new school. Measure T is for voters. You pass Measure T, that's for existing schools. And now this new thing is for the new school. So I think that if we keep it just to North Bay Shore and not tippy-toe into the debate about densification of Mountain View and the broader thing, I think it's a cleaner argument for the voters and cleaner for us as well.
I think that's, the survey, we're putting a lot of weight on the survey, but I think that what's good about our conversation right now is we are trying to think through the possible reactions of the voters and how to bring the voters with us to be able to do this. And it's really important to hear that from multiple perspectives, and each trustee brings a different perspective. So that's good, solid discussion. And then I think now we're going to get some data with the survey that's going to kind of give meat to those bones so that we can better understand the issue and how to approach it on the ballot. I believe do we need to give direction, Dr. Rudolph, on pursuing the survey as an immediate next step?
I think I heard from you, Devin, that you would like us to pursue the survey as our next step. I think I heard it from Laura, both
yeah.
Laura's, Chris and Devin.
We got it. We had unanimous thumbs up right there.
All right.
All right.
Yeah, thank you. This discussion was very helpful for previewing the kind of issues we'll want to raise in the survey. So this has been super helpful.
Welcome to this board. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. We will say goodnight to you all, and we will move on to our last discussion item for the evening. This is item 9B, in-person or remote board meetings. And we have Dr. Rudolph here to help facilitate this discussion a little bit.
Yep. So I think there's been a lot of back and forth about whether or not to have in-person or continue on with virtual meetings. I did do some quick diving that can sort of help. We included 2 graphics. So the first one that you saw in the board packet is the former tiered practice, which actually mirrors the CDC's new guidelines, with the exception of there are some differences in terms of the positivity rate is skewed a little bit more. I want to say that California was a little bit more conservative in terms of its rankings than what CDC is. We are currently in the second tier, or second tier to the top, so it's a substantial spread. I double checked again today. So we're not in the furthest one, but we are still pretty much up there. And actually, I just leave it to y'all to make some decisions about how you want to handle meetings. Just so you know, in the boardroom, we do have plastic shields that will be split between each person. You can see through them and everything. And obviously, the same policies that we ask our staff to wear. We do have microphones as part of the speaker system, but we will be wearing masks. And then we'll try to limit staff as much as we can so that we don't bring too many people in as possible. And then the second thing, if you choose to do in-person meetings, I'll talk to legal counsel. I've already spoke with Will Tunick once, but I'll speak to him again about whether or not you can limit visitors coming in, or does open to the public mean that it's open to the public, provided that you're streaming, or do you have to open your actual doors? And if so, do you have to have limitations? So I'll ask some more of those questions just to get a couple. I know he gave me a quick summary, but I'll just to double check, depending on where you land in terms of what you want to do moving forward. So I'm going to turn it over to y'all because I know a lot of different ideas will sort of toss out there. And then, of course, if you have questions, I've done a little research on the CDC guidelines, as well as sort of where we are in the county. And I can try my best to sort of to stay abreast. It is different than, when we meet weekly with Dr. Cody and her team, and we're getting guidance. It's not the same as what the CDC is doing. And so, I think all of us in these weekly meetings are trying our best to interpret sort of the moving target that is, because they do keep adjusting it every so often. So I'll just to put that out there, but I'm going to turn it back over to y'all so that you can deliberate about sort of where you want to go.
And Dr. Rudolph, before we kind of dive in, I I had the state website on the county and statewide data on COVID cases for updated as of today, and I'm curious if it matches what you have. It says for Santa Clara County, 12.3 cases per 100,000 is the 7-day average. So that would put us at 86.1 out of 100, which is what the CDC is using, which is substantial, but just to give people that number of where we are. And then the positivity rate in testing, the 7-day rate is 3.5%. And on Santa Clara County's rates by vaccination status for positive infections, they are showing our county overall case rate is 12.6, and that's per 100,000 residents at a 7-day average. The unvaccinated case rate is 24.8, and the fully vaccinated case rate is 7.8. So just keep in mind that that 7.8 over 7 days is 54.6, which is also substantial transmission amongst vaccinated people, not just unvaccinated people. Trustee Chang.
Question, Dr. Rudolph. Whenever we do go back to in-person as a board in the boardroom, do you envision that your staff will be able to have the option to be able to present to us remotely? I imagine it is a quality of life issue. I think it's been a benefit for your staff to be able to present that way. So do you envision that this will, as the post-COVID changes of the workplace, is that something that you think will stay?
Yes, we will balance between in-person and remote. Obviously, if you're meeting in person, there has to be a couple people there to run the operations. But we will, there are in some instances, there are staff members who are just here because they're, we require them to be there. And then in other instances, there are people who are actually presenting. And so one of the things I'll do is I'll either make the determination that they're presenting remotely or that they may be there to present, but no one else is there. So everybody else is remote Zooming in or remote working in. And then we'll have somebody managing the system the whole way. So there'll be a combination of both, but we won't our goal is not to bring everybody in all at once until we start coming down and the risk of infection isn't as great, or possible infection.
Trustee Wheeler.
Yeah, so I have a couple comments, but before I make my comments, I want to respond to the statistics that you provided, President Conley, and I appreciate those. So one of the things we saw in a presentation, I think today, and maybe I saw it Tuesday also, was the difference of infection and vaccination rates in different parts of the county. So when you provide a countywide statistic base, that I think that isn't what we should be looking at. What we should be looking at is what is it like in North County? What does it look like in Mountain View? So I'm interested in that. Another thing I wanted to, this is part of my comments, regarding community comments. I would hope that, I don't know if we would do this for the next 20 years, but I would hope that for a while we would continue to allow or encourage or require community commenters to make their comments virtually. So what we've seen during this time of virtual meetings is that we've gotten good numbers of community members who've attended our meetings and made community comments. So I would hope that would continue that. And now I'll say that I am in favor of coming back to in-person meetings. I think the value to all of us of having, real conversations in person, looking at each other, not in a box, is very high. So I would recommend that we continue to look at the, the transmission percentages. So, I could be persuaded otherwise if everything just goes sky high. But as of right now, I would like us to come in, and I'll tell you, I heard something, a couple months ago that just deeply resonated with me, which is if we're asking our teachers to come into class in person, we should come in person too.
Trustee or Vice President Blakely, did you have a comment or no?
I do, but Trustee Chen can go first. I'm not in a hurry.
I am concerned that my concern is I recognize this thing. I want to show solidarity with our teachers and the optics of that, but the public, I'm concerned about the public's health, because the minute we meet in person, we have to allow the public to come and engage, and they're engaging in an untested environment where breakthrough rates in Santa Clara County are above 20% for vaccinated. So I think that just like all decisions I hope in our district around COVID are tied to infection rates, I would not be comfortable with us returning until infection rates are lower. I think using a tiered system I think that's how we should make all decisions for our kids, and I think for ourselves, because it's not about us, it's about the public who comes there, who are parents, who then come home and they get sick and take it back to their kids. Like for collaborate, I would, Ellen, I would come over to your house and have a meeting. I'm happy to do that, but it's the public I'm worried about if we start meeting formally.
So say more. I don't understand. When I said I would encourage or require, and Superintendent Rudolph said he's going to talk to our attorney about, the ins and outs of this. If we said community members should come to meetings, and we're providing this mechanism, come to our meetings virtually. So that is no health issue for community members to come to a virtual meeting. So the health issue in my mind is the 6 of us coming in person, and what would be the impact of that? I don't see an impact on community comment.
I agree. If that's allowed, I'd be open to that. If it was allowed that we can stop the public from coming while infection rates are high, I'd be open to that.
Trustee Berman and then Vice President Blakely.
So I will say that I feel comfortable coming in. I think that coming in the trustees meeting in person and limiting the number of people that come in. So whether it be us and someone helping us set up the live stream, I think that would be a great opportunity for us to do this work together in person. And me being a new board member, I think that it would be extremely beneficial to be able to have some time with my fellow board members in person. That being said, if it doesn't happen in 3 weeks, that's fine, or in 4 weeks. I don't know what the timeline is, but I'm okay with that. I'm not in favor of having anyone in that boardroom that is not vaccinated. So, like I said, I just want to limit the number of people that are present in the boardroom with us, just to keep everybody safe. So if we can continue the virtual meeting and the virtual comments as much as possible, I would be in favor of that.
Vice President Blakely.
Pretty much agree with everything that Trustee Berman just said. I definitely see everybody's been echoing the benefit of our meeting live, so long as it's safe. If things just really go through the ceiling again, different story. But my understanding is that the emergency rules around the Brown Act, at least as of today, come off on or expire on September 30th. So, when we speak to council, and that may get extended because of what's going on now, but trying to find out a little bit more around, both can the community participate virtually, but what if one of us got sick? A lot of these breakthrough cases are very low symptom, and we obviously couldn't come in person if we had COVID, but we might feel just fine because we're vaccinated and be able to participate by Zoom. And do we go back to the old stuff where if we didn't post a note on our front door and you didn't put it in the agenda with all our home addresses, or even if there's a way to do some kind of a backup in case we get sick, but we can still participate by Zoom. I'd love to have some flexibility there in the event, of transmission. And the other thing is we are technically district employees. And I think whatever rules we have, September 5th, I think you're going to be discussing the rules around requiring vaccination and testing. So I think that those rules would logically apply to us as well. And so I'd be very comfortable saying, you've got to get a test. We can sign up for tests ahead of time. The Tuesday before the meeting, get a test, and we should have the results by the meeting or something like that, if that made sense.
So I would like to comment real quick. Oh,
I was just going to put some context to what you were saying, Trustee Conley, earlier about the data. So just so everybody can see the numbers that she was referring to. So here you can see the vaccination rates. So the case rate for unvaccinated is climbing. For fully vaccinated is at 7.8, and for unvaccinated is 24.8, which brings us to overall case. We are actually at the highest tier for, this is on the CDC's guidelines for COVID, so we have increased a little bit. In terms of the case count, if you're just looking for similarities, what I try to do is I try to go back to right around the same period of time. And so if you're looking right in August, end of July, we will be seeing a similar peak. Then obviously this is flu season, so we saw the biggest jump. And then if you're just looking in terms of, there's one, I think I'm missing one piece of data that I had earlier. So, okay, that's not it. So those are the different data points that were there. Just because I know you were referencing the numbers and I didn't necessarily do a presentation. I just, we just put the information there because you were talking about tiers. But I do think it's important for you to just see the data, sort of the raw data that she was talking about.
thank you, Dr. Rudolph. So I believe that the conditions that we have for our teachers and staff are we're comfortable with our teachers and staff being in those conditions, and so we should be too. There are some differences or distinctions about board meetings. We know that everyone at our school sites is required to be masked at all times and that they're in compliance with that. And when there is eating, for example, the staff lounges, the staff aren't gathering unmasked with each other. We can say that the public coming to our meetings should wear masks and they must have a mask on to come in, but we don't have control over what they actually do when they're in the room. And I've heard from other trustees in our county about people starting to show up angry at public board meetings in person about masking. I've read it in Facebook posts related to Mountain View that there is already an anti-mask sentiment. It's quiet as opposed to some other areas, but I have heard it from parents in Mountain View who are outraged that we require children and teachers to wear masks. And so frankly, my concern is members of the public coming to the meeting specifically to protest masking, or when we start talking about vaccinations, to protest vaccinations by also going on unmasked and putting us and the other staff members who are there with us at a really high level of risk. And my primary concern is that I have a child who is too young to be vaccinated, and I don't want to bring something home to him. And so this idea of could we meet in person under the same conditions we ask our staff to be during the day, and have members of the public participate virtually? Yes, I'm much more comfortable with that. Do we meet in person and have members of the public also attend in person? I would like to see a step down in cases, and we could talk about what that looks like, or, you know, a vaccination for children under the age of 12. Dr. Rudolph.
And I just want to point, we actually don't have adults meeting in the district.
Okay.
So faculty meetings, professional
virtual?
development are all done in a virtual setting. We originally set out to do that. And then we had a couple of cases pop up and quickly change course. And these were breakthrough cases. And so we do not have, if you're looking for apples to apples comparison, faculty meetings are not conducted in person. It doesn't mean that you can't have meetings in person. Some school sites are doing it, but they're doing them outdoors. And I think, you know, they're doing them if you're in a large enough space where you can have adequate amount of distancing. And if, you know, in the instance of a couple of sites, they didn't have internet, so they had no choice but to figure out some other ways. But it is pretty much across the board, like when I hold a cabinet meeting or a huddle, each one of us are in our own particular places. So, and that's partly in true because the CDC guidelines are different for adults to kids than it is for adults to adults. So just want to be clear that I don't want people thinking that we're holding faculty meetings when we're not.
Trustee Chang.
Thank you. I really like the idea of us aligning with what the adults on campus are doing and for faculty, for adult collaboration. So to the point when the district decides it's safe for teachers to meet for their meetings, I think we should be reflecting that. And certainly when we do meet, I think we should be then at that point doing the same testing procedures that we're asking the teachers to do. But, and I think that there's some caveats, right? Like, assume we're gonna be talking about the retreat. I think that us talking about doing the retreat outdoors or something where we could be in person, I think that's something we could talk about. But like, even if you encourage people to go online, the type of people who would maybe possibly storm a meeting in order to protest aren't going to storm your meeting. I guarantee you that if we have people who are opposing masking, and given the current climate, the news reports across, I just got back from Oregon, and if you saw the board meeting in Bend, Oregon, I know some of you guys have saw that, we can say you should be online. But if we're in that boardroom, we're not locking the doors. They will storm in. I mean, in Bend, they called a recess, and the parents took over, and they elected themselves as the new board and took over the dais. And that was in Bend, Oregon. So like, I would say that we could say, oh, they should be online. But if we're meeting in that room and there's an infection rate going on, I think we are putting the public, even those who are upset with us possibly in that situation, at risk, because they will come if we're there. So I just hope that we follow what the staff is doing. If the staff's not meeting, until they meet, I think that, and for things like retreats, I hope we do meet in person for that. That's coming up. But I hope we don't rush to meet in person if there's a risk to the public. Unless we can legally say they can't come and lock the doors, which I just can't imagine us legally doing.
I was going to say, I think the retreat is usually open to the public as well. And we've been streaming them as well. So if we can, I don't know if we can do that outdoors or not, if we can stream it outdoors and also deal with members of the public.
We haven't been streaming it. I think we did last time, but we didn't record it. But historically, we have not streamed the retreat.
Oh.
They've had access to the meeting live.
Yeah.
We haven't recorded it.
Right. That's what I mean by streaming. Yeah. Like anyone can zoom in right now for the retreat because we weren't meeting in person. But if we meet in person, we get back into the conversation about how to include the public.
So why don't I do this? I can reach out to Will Tunick and Trustee Berman looked like you were going to say something.
I was going to say something. I was just going to say that, I'm also sensitive to my fellow board members that are feeling uncomfortable, right? So while I feel comfortable coming in and I'm looking forward to having this conversation live, and the benefits that come from being in person, you know, I think this is also a marathon, right? This is gonna be ongoing. So I think if we need a little bit more time to make sure, you know, everyone in this group feels comfortable, I'm also okay with that. And I always get a little nervous when we talk about setting our own sort of tiers or benchmarks. You know, I want to look at what health guidelines are, what's safe about meeting indoors, and I want to follow those guidelines as opposed to us sort of setting our own set of what the benchmarks are going to be. So I want us to do what is being recommended to us by the health professionals around us. We're going to take their advice. And like that being said, I'd like to get back in person as soon as we can, but it doesn't have to be in 2 weeks. Just want to put that out there.
Trustee Wheeler.
Yeah, so I'm very sensitive to the issue of people coming to board meetings who are unvaccinated or want to complain about you know, what the district is doing. I'm very sensitive to that. I've been reading those stories, watching those videos for quite a while. But I also think about, and I haven't experienced this, so I will tell you, I can't say that. I've experienced a couple board meetings like this. Where do you stop or start? You know, so if you say that we're not going to have in-person meetings until there's nothing on the agenda for weeks that's non-controversial, and that, you know, in society, there's nothing that's controversial. So I imagine this vaccination and mask issues will be with us for quite a while. And, you know, some politically angry people. So I think, you know, we need to make a decision about, you know, this is where I really hope the answer that we get from William Tunick is that we can, you know, have our community comments be virtual. You know, that's my fairy tale solution. But I think that if we come back in person, and I think we should soon, unless rates go way up, that we should be ready for the community comment that we get. I'm hoping that we don't get, you know, a stormed boardroom like you were describing, Trustee Chang. And I know that this is, you know, that storming of boardrooms thing is something that is, you know, a phenomenon that is being encouraged by some groups. But I just don't feel right about, I'm going to use the word hiding in our rooms to avoid being around the public. So
I think there's a public health risk. I think there's a distinction between hiding for, like, I deal with angry people all the time and I've dealt with them in person. Try teaching kindergarten. It's just, you know, so the distinction that Trustee Chang made earlier was about the case, the prevalence of the virus in the community right now, and tying that, he didn't say we're never going to see the public again, even if, including the angry public. He said having people storm in when the rate is substantial is what he's concerned about, and that is what I am concerned about too. If the case rate is not as at the substantial level, if it goes down, yes, we're always going to get people who come in who are upset. But it's different when they bring something that's a public health risk when they do that. Trustee Berman.
So are we looking to hear back whether or not we can leave make our meetings closed to the public and have everyone go through virtually? Is that something we're going to explore, or are we just sort of making a decision now without knowing that?
It sounds like we need to find that out, number one, because that's something, yes, everybody's interested in.
Yes.
I am aligned with Trustee Chang on what we're asking staff to do is what we should be doing in terms of meeting with adults, but I don't know if there's a majority on that. Is anyone else aligned around that, or is that just the two of us? No, Trustee Blakely is not. Trustee Berman and Trustee, okay, so it sounds like the majority of the board would like to find out about when or how Zoom could be used to facilitate public comment. And then I think we go from there. Trustee Wheeler.
Yeah, and I'll also say that, we're experiencing this and this is one of the things that's so difficult about it is we're constantly having to, the ground is shifting under our feet. It's been doing it for 2 years. So I would be in favor of, some sort of, level, that we can agree to, that if it gets to this level, then, we're not going to have live board meetings. And I am satisfied right now, the level that we're at in Mountain View, that I'm satisfied that I would like us to come back. And if it goes lower, that I am super ready to come back. But I think we need to be ready to be, looking at all the, the reports that are coming out, weekly. And I would say again, look at the ones for Mountain View. Don't look for Santa Clara County.
Trustee Chang, and then oh wow, everyone has comments.
I recognize we need like Mount View, and I don't know the case rate for Mount. It's so hard actually to get the case rate by city. But then county-wise, we are, if the tier system was still in place, our county is on the verge of purple, as is most of the Bay Area is already purple, if they were tracking using the system that parents are familiar with. And we are only just entering fall. So like I think it's worth the public recognizing that like we are in a high prevalence state right now. We're not as bad as Florida, not as bad as Oregon, but we're bad. Like we're bad, worse we've been in many, many months. So like I think that at this moment, in my opinion, when I look at the numbers that President Connolly presented, we are at a high prevalence state, in my opinion, right now.
Vice President Blakely.
I was just going to reiterate what I'd said earlier about when we seek guidance from council, looking around flexibility. If we do decide to come back live, just us, and one of us finds out on Wednesday that we have COVID, but we feel fine, is there flexibility for us to go ahead and Zoom in or phone in, or do we have to are we basically just frozen out of the meeting because we got sick and we didn't post 72 hours ahead of time? So that's just one other little caveat. Thanks.
I'd like that question to be asked and answered by our legal staff.
It's a very good question. And then Trustee Berman, did you have a, I thought.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that once we have, I imagine things are changing all of the time. So I imagine there could be some changes in the next couple of weeks. Is this something we can, once we have that response, can we revisit this conversation with that information?
Yes.
Potentially, and yeah.
And we do have a board retreat coming up. I don't know if everyone's filled out the doodle. 3 of us have. Okay, two, Trustee Chang, have you filled it out? Oh, you did. It's just you, Berman.
Well, yeah. I was going to look at the high holidays, but I don't think that they. I just didn't get around to looking at the Jewish high holidays. but I don't think that they're on the week on that day. So I was about to fill it out and remembered. So I'll fill it out tonight.
I think if
They're
we
in
have the
September.
information by then, the retreat is a good time to discuss it.
Okay.
Well, Dr. Rudolph, a whole bunch of nothing. Some requests for information. Trustee Wheeler.
Yeah, and are we thinking, I'm hoping we're going to be able to do that August 28th, 8. Are we thinking that we're going to meet live?
For that,
Mhm.
I don't know, Dr.
And
Rudolph.
I like Trustee Chang's idea of, I could see us all at the picnic tables out, outside of the district office. I could see meeting outside for the retreat, and there's, space, nice space that we could spread out and a lot of people could attend. And I'm imagining that the outside area has internet.
So my question is, how would we do public participation and public comment for that? Because the public is allowed to attend the retreat.
Mm-hmm.
So are you saying the public could come and join us outside? Is that the goal? Or are you thinking they could Zoom in?
I'm interested in hearing what Trustee Chang has to say about that.
I mean, I'm trying to think through all the facilities across all the school sites. Is there one where like it kind of meets the facility needs of us having a meeting that is open air?
Probably the largest space that has where you can open the most doors would probably be Graham's MUR. I think maybe one of the few. The innovation centers don't have enough air circulation to go through and wouldn't be open enough to the public, at least with the MURs when we use it for all hands. You have the 9 screens and then you have the speakers that are outdoors. And so if I was picking a place that could facilitate that type of meeting, that's probably where I would choose.
Dr. Rep, also the performing arts spaces. We could be on stage, right? And if the audience, if members of the public wanted to watch, they could be 20 yards apart from each other.
It's true. Last time we held, of course, it's a different board, but the last time we held a meeting in the auditoriums, the feedback from the board was that it created a weird dynamic where you feel like you're sitting above everybody else. But that was 2 boards ago when we were sort of homeless and bouncing around from boardroom to boardroom. So because we were under the district office was under construction. So, I don't know if that's the sentiment now, but at least that was the feedback that was given then.
I would also say just historically, not very many members of the public attend the retreats. The only one that I can recall in the time that I've served on the board was when we had a meeting about the Wisman School at the beginning of the retreat, like at 8:30, and the German school community came and attended for that first half hour. But people, it's a retreat and it's on a Saturday, and we're generally, well, this could be different, but historically, this has not been an active public engagement event.
If it is, well, I think we have some things to hammer out about how the public would participate and where it would be, and we need to think about that, because I'm much more comfortable outside, but then I'm not sure how we set everything up and how the public can participate if they want to. I do think there was value in people being able to watch our January retreat being over Zoom. I actually know people who watched that and came back feeling really more informed about the processes of the board and how we think and discuss things. And it was high value for them in a way that, in this sense of accessibility of having as many people as possible be able to understand what we do. But sounds like we have to look around and see what we can figure out. Trustee Wheeler and then Trustee Berman.
Yeah, so regarding in the Graham MUR, not the auditorium, but the MUR that you were describing with the glass doors that can get opened. When I was offering the picnic tables, I think the Graham MUR would work a lot better. And, again, people could spread out, then you've got all the IV capability. I think that would work well. I don't know about members of the community. I think you could certainly set a place where, if people wanted to come, a place where they could, sit, or they could be outside. We've done that before. Anyway, I say all this to say that I agree with MUR instead of the picnic table.
All right.
And if we can't make it happen live, we can't make it happen live. I mean, I know you guys will figure out the best approach given the data and also given the advice we get from legal counsel.
Trustee Berman.
I think that it would be, so for streaming the retreat, does the whole retreat usually gets streamed from start to finish? No. So
very rarely.
But we did last time in January.
I believe so. Yeah, we did.
We streamed it, and as far as I know, we had 2 people attend.
That was like a legal requirement, wasn't it? Weren't we like? Isn't that
we were legally, if we were Zooming, we had to make it public. But I think people popped in and out a little bit. And then,
yeah, I think my only concern about being open to the public if we were meeting in person was that it's a little bit more challenging to socially. We won't know who's showing up that's vaccinated or unvaccinated, and masked or not masked, and it might be just a little bit more challenging to manage. And I think that makes it a little tricky.
You just want to point out that masks are legally required in indoor areas in California. So that's a gating item, I think.
We would be outdoors, right?
No, the MUR is an indoor space with lots of doors.
Got it. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, trustees. We will now move on to item 10, board updates.
So I'll say I sent mine to Ms. Yalba.
Okay. And then, Trustee Ching.
I had a question. I didn't attend live, but I was looking at the county's board update from this earlier today, and I don't know if anyone wanted to give a quick summary for the public, because there was some really interesting stuff in those slides, especially about impact on school site vaccination sites and things like that. But did anyone attend who?
We were all there, except I think you were probably teaching, but everyone else was there. I can speak to the county has found that the under-vaccinated, the least vaccinated age group is the 12 to 17-year-olds across the county, but the Mountain View, Los Altos, Palo Alto area has a very high vaccination rate for that group. I want to say it was 97 or 98%. And they are finding that the most successful, or one of the most successful places to get people to come be vaccinated is, oh, look, is that 99.7 or 98?
Is that not a typo? Is it really 99% of ages 12 to 17 in our city are vaccinated?
That's what it says, but it seems very high, doesn't it?
It seems very high, but so the county, Dr. Dewan said that they found school site vaccinations, that offering vaccinations to the community at school sites has been one of their most successful strategies for getting people vaccinated. And so I really want to thank our district and the partners from the county who started doing vaccinations at Castro and Mistral, who did them at Crittenden, and then at multiple school sites all summer long, because I think that is why we have such a high vaccination rate for that age group. It's wonderful. And when we move forward, when the vaccine becomes available for our younger students, I think that's something we will probably want to put in place as quickly as possible. Any other notes from the meeting that others would like to share? No. Yes, Trustee Berman.
I just would like to share that Reach Potential did a school supply distribution the last few days, and I was able to go on Sunday and Monday to we were over at one of our RV parks by the VTA, and over at the little park by Ortega in California. And it was just really terrific to see all the kids and the families showing up to get their backpacks and hygiene kits and shoes and socks or gift cards and school supplies. They were doing some tie-dye with masks. And so just a really, really exciting event. So thank you to Reach Potential for doing that for our children and our students. And it was just really terrific.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Trustee Wheeler.
I'll comment, and I think we said this, 4 months ago, but it's worth saying again, that PTA Council gave Reach Potential an honorary service award to recognize the outstanding work that they do in the community. So I appreciate you giving this modern example, Trustee.
And we will now move on to item 11, items for future agendas. Dr. Rudolph, were there any items for future agendas submitted?
Yep, I have 5.
Okay.
All right.
Do you want to read them all through first, and then we can go through and see if there are votes?
Sure.
Okay.
The first one is a non-action report to the board on COVID safety procedures in schools. And this as a repeating discussion and update at each board meeting, as long as local infection rate is high, how can be defined as region nearing the former purple tier. The second one is a discussion of forming a board or district advisory group on COVID consisting of MVWSD community members with medical or scientific expertise to help advise COVID protocols. The third is goal setting for the board retreat. The fourth is a non-action presentation to the board of the past timeline, decision process, and community checkpoints that were part of the middle school math change. And the fifth is a non-action report to the board on current status of the financial conditions and timeline for teacher housing project.
All right, so let's start with the first one. Oh, Trustee Wheeler.
I'd like, so I heard 4 and 5, and so for 5, that sounds like a report that could be made, not necessarily something that would be part of an agenda. Number 4, will you repeat that request? The one about math?
Give me 1 second. I'm gonna copy it and paste it on a new document, and then that way everybody can see it.
And while that is going on, I know the next board meeting does have an agenda item around COVID protocols, Dr. Rudolph, yes? Okay.
So the first one's covered then, if that's already on.
It's already on the agenda for the next meeting. And that's, Dr. Rudolph mentioned that earlier when testing came up in the update, when you asked during the superintendent's update, Trustee Chang, he mentioned that that is coming back at our next meeting.
But if the board retreats on the 28th, we don't have a meeting before then, do we?
No.
To set retreat goals?
No, do we?
I don't think we do. Because in the past, I know in the past boards, we usually
do
talk about that.
We have a meeting. No, our next meeting is September 9th. That's true. I forgot August only has one meeting. We did discuss those goals, not in a super formal way, but we talked about them in the spring, I want to say like in June, during talking about future agenda items. We talked about, or maybe it was scattered through other things. We talked about a governance calendar. We talked about goals.
So if we do the 28th, perhaps we can send our thoughts to Dr. Rudolph and he can kind of like synthesize that.
Whatever the Brown Act compliant format is.
Because usually we do, I mean, I don't know, usually. I know in the past, like there was some kind of like planning, some collective discussion about the retreat.
I have to say, I don't think we have done that on the board without you. Yeah. Trustee Vice President Blakely, is that correct?
Well, my recollection is that we do the goal setting at the retreat. That's, one of the like main reasons for the retreat is to do the goal setting. Am I? I think so. It'd be like an agenda item on the retreat agenda. No?
No. So this board meeting is more about team building and bringing the team together and just sort of an overview of what's coming for the year. It's the second retreat that is in the spring that sets the goals that, because it is before the budget. And so it's part of the primer that leads the full direction of where we're headed.
So this one, the handbook comes back that we had talked about at the last one as well. The finalized board goals that we did last time come back.
So if there's not like policy being discussed at this first board retreat, then I guess number 3 is not as needed, right? Because if it's
we aren't working on new board goals at this retreat. That is the retreat that's usually in January or February. That's tied to
unconfusing retreats. So
yeah, I don't remember having a meeting discussing the content of the fall retreat before, or having that as an agenda item. But we did have an agenda item for the January, February one. Trustee Berman.
So for number 2, would number 2 sort of naturally be embedded with the number 1 if we're going to be talking about COVID safety? Presumably, whoever brought this item up could discuss this on that day, or would this take on sort of if we decide to add this to the discussion, does it add sort of a more formal twist to that COVID conversation, the COVID update on September 9th?
I'm curious as to how we also have the focus groups and the COVID advisory groups that have been done.
Yes.
And does this overlap in some way or not? Or do those groups already have community members with a medical background on them?
Well, I think the challenge here is that, we hear from a lot of individuals who may have a medical degree, but they're not necessarily epidemiologists, nor are they working within this particular field. And, we spend every week I'm meeting with Dr. Cody's team to sort of discuss sort of the protocols, and we're able to ask questions. And so we do have focus groups. We have a reopening task force. We have the ERB. We have the union presidents that we talk to about various things that are coming down the pipeline to sort of get a feel for what takes place. And then we'll test it against them. And then we also go back and ask Dr. Cody and her team sort of what are their approaches. And so I think, if the board wants to form a group, obviously that is well within the board's purview to do. But in terms of district advisory groups, I think we have sufficient amount. And I would be leery as to someone who's not necessarily practicing in this field to ask them. It's not to say that what they're sending or what they're giving us isn't valid. It's just that, you know, I would want somebody whose sole focus is this, as you know, epidemiology, infectious diseases, as opposed to someone who's just in the medical field. So if Dr. Fauci was here, I'd say yes, we definitely would do it. But that's just my take.
I know that we have a parent in the district who is a pediatric epidemiologist at Stanford. If I could convince that person to join one of our focus groups, like that would be magical. Are the focus groups being refreshed this year? Are they, can we sweep some of those if there are people who have?
There are, yeah. I think if someone is interested in bringing their insight, I think that would be an appropriate place to have them join. If they just email us, we can make sure that they're included in the conversation. I think that's more than appropriate, because naturally we have people who have left that group also, who may have had 8th graders and who were part of it and who are no longer in the district. And so we're always looking for new people. So that I think that will be an appropriate place. Each group has a very different focus in advisory capacity. But if, you know, for instance, this person that you're talking about who's a pediatric epidemiologist from Stanford, if they joined, you know, there's definitely that we could definitely find a role for them to help advise or to provide context and insight to.
I wonder then if for number 2, if it sounds like, Dr. Rudolph, you have quite the team, advising. So I wonder then if at the next that September board meeting, if maybe you can just share with the public in your presentation, just sort of include who those groups are, because it does sound like you have some key individuals that are advising and looking at just giving recommendations.
Yep. Sounds good. But again, if you've been conversing with somebody and, you know, they've expressed an interest, you can have them email me directly, and we can have them included into the group. Obviously, one of the first things that we'll be talking about is the testing protocol. And so we'll be reaching out to them to discuss, sort of to get an understanding of what people are looking for, just because it seems to be a topic of big discussion right now.
And then, so it sounds like we've kind of discussed 1 through 3. 5, I believe, is going to come back to the board this fall. Am I correct, Dr. Rudolph?
We have a presentation that we're going to give on teacher housing, give you an overview of what it looks like. You know, we just approved the financial expenditures to pay for the fees and stuff. We can see if we can pull how much we've spent to date. Obviously, if you go by 777 Middlefield now, you'll see the fence is up, and it's 100% vacant. And so they're going to start moving towards demo over the next couple of months. But we can definitely do an update for that. We're trying to be a little bit more mindful of how much we put on a schedule at any given time. But it is something that we, between now and the end of the calendar year, we'll have a presentation on it. So it's because obviously it's a big thing that we want to tout and we want to talk about, and it's starting to pick up speed.
Okay.
I would just say on that one also that to just be mindful of the appropriate time, because we are going to have to talk about, you know, hiring a manager and how to figure out the applications and all that. But to just, I don't think we necessarily need to talk about it right now. There was funds that we just approved in consent today in the warrants. It's Mountain View Owner LLC, I think, is that project. So So I wouldn't rush it. I want to keep the focus on the kids. But of course, when the timing is right, we all need to hear about it and make decisions.
Yeah, well, I mean, what's coming up next, and when we bring the presentation, I can bring this back to you. So you have to form a housing board. You're going to have to set the rents, which have to, ultimately you got to make sure that you can pay the maintenance fee plus the land lease,
The debt service,
right?
yeah.
So that's somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.5 million. So you have 144 units and you need to bring, that's sort of where you want to be. And then you need to make a determination based off of the square footage, how much you want to charge. And then from there, you have to go in this whole process that we'll set up about, how we do verification, how do we do this? Because they will manage the property but we're going to have to be the ones in control of leasing. But we'll, as part of that larger presentation, we will bring all that information back because it is going to start in earnest in terms of getting this ready, because we're probably in the neighborhood of about 24 months on this project, depending on how fast they demo. And then, obviously, how fast they move. I know their other project they've now moved to complete or to move into modular, which is going to be faster. So I'm sure if they could switch to modular for this one and go 7 stories, they would. But, we know that they want to move fast because the price, the cost index is going up.
Trustee Chang.
I think an interesting time for the board to hear about this one would be just when we have a sense of, are there any substantial escalations in price beyond what the projection was when the bond went out? So if there's like a gap of money or funds that either, needing to use more than we anticipated of bond or other funding sources, I think that would be a good logical place whenever that might be for this to return.
And then the last item we have is number 4. And if everyone wants to give that a read, are there comments on that one? Trustee Wheeler.
Yeah, I'm interested in a presentation like this. And I also, as part of my interest, I'll say that I'm interested in, and I imagine that this is going to be done without me saying so, but I imagine that our staff is going to be tracking this year's students who are in that, especially the 8th grade 8.2. How did it work? How well did it work to just have the single class instead of the double class? Because I know that we got a lot of community comments about this and, some questions and frustrations. And, I think it would be a service to our community to have a, well-articulated public presentation about this. And like I say, I would imagine that part of this presentation is going to be a description of, and we're going to be looking at, how well these students did this year. Should we continue with the single period class?
Trustee Berman has a thumbs up. The Trustee Blakely says no. So there's a majority, Trustee Chang says yes. Would it make sense for that type, so in terms of what the process was, there was the district letter that was put out. So we sort of have a written report of what the process was. But would it make sense if there is a presentation, which trustees are voting for, to do it after I'm going to call it, it's not the diagnostic at the beginning of the year, but the first benchmark test when we see how those students are doing?
So what I would suggest is at the retreat, you're going to have to pull something off the plate in order to get that done. You have RTI, MTSS, you have you were talking about the same people, right? So the people who are doing this presentation are the same ones who had the 118 slide deck, right? And so you have all these other things that are on the plate. And, you know, we have a new strategic plan, plus we have ELOP, the Extended Learning Opportunity Grant that we have to figure out what to do with. That was scored to scrambling. We have the ISP. And so there's only so much bandwidth that our team has. So if we could at the retreat, look at the full slate of everything that's on the table. And then for that team, I would suggest you're going to have to give something up if this is a presentation that you want, or delay it to a later time, because I don't know if while we all have that burst of energy right now, I can tell you it's not, people are already fatigued, and we just came off a summer break. And so I just don't know how we can manage a new strategic plan, continuing in sort of this crisis mode, plus the changes with the state, and then adding something else on.
So you want further discussion at the retreat?
So we're gonna pull out the governance calendar at the retreat and talk about all the different things that are coming up in future board meetings and what those pieces are. And so I think that this comes up as part of that discussion. It sounds like, Dr. Rudolph, because it's about staff time.
Yeah, and we will have a full outline of all the items that are on the table, so that you understand the full breadth and scope of work in front of us. And that way you can make a more informed decision, because in theory, like right now, you see one person do a presentation, they don't do another presentation for a couple months. It seems like, well, what are they doing? But I can tell you that the last presentation that you just had was probably 3 months in the making. And obviously, just because of the amount of detailed work that sort of went into it, it takes a lot of time. So we'll give you that information so that you're armed with it. And then I think, as President Conley said, we will look at all the items that are coming up, and then you'll be able to have a better idea of sort of if something can fit in and where you want it, and then what can come off the table or what can be delayed.
And my goal is that we have a pretty transparent process about the workload, which informs all of us when we're requesting board items versus timing of board items, which teams are working on things, and then also how much work different items require. So we're gonna bring that one into the scrum at the retreat. Okay. All right. On that note, we're going to move on to future board meeting dates. They will be September 9th, September 23rd, October 7th, October 21st, and we will possibly have our retreat on August 28th, but we just need to confirm to finalize. And at 9:55 p.m., this meeting of the Mountain View School Board is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Good night. Stay safe.